Шануєм і ми, браття, у своїй сторонці. І душу й тіло ми положим за нашу свободу. І покажем, що ми браття козацького
Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and today I'm coming with you to talk about the Day 29 news. Today we've had some huge events happen in terms of things that may be considered in the future, turning points in the war, perhaps. I'm just saying that right now it appears that some things that happened today were very critical and very important. But, you know, once again, that's just kind of like a in the moment thing because it's such an impressive feat, but we'll just have to see in the coming days and weeks if it actually pans out to be as important as it is. So now moving on to the schedule for tonight, we're going to actually do something a little bit backwards today, and we're going to cover a specific bit of news first in the port city of Berdyansk. We'll get to that in a second, but as you can see in the title, I think you get the idea of what happened there today. We will then move into the Kiev area and talk about the events that have happened near Kiev. There has been no news in the Chernihiv area. We will move on to the questions in between. And I'd also like to answer something really quick because a lot of people wonder why I interrupt the news with questions. And the thing is that people who help support the channel, I want them to know that I appreciate them because they're helping me to continue to do this every day. And so in the process, they're pretty much allowing this video to run because without that kind of support, I wouldn't be able to do this because I have to go get another job because I wouldn't be, you know, able to do this anymore. So I make sure to answer their questions as much as possible. And so we answer questions in between the Northern Front, the Eastern Front. We then move on to the Eastern Front and cover all of the news here. Then we're going to move on down to the Southern Front. I'll answer some questions in between the transition from the Eastern Front to the Southern Front. We'll cover all of the information from the Southern Front. Then finally, we're going to move on to the international news that we've got because we've got a couple of examples today, which are very large and incredibly interesting. So, without talking for a little bit too, also one more thing. Speaking of super chats, we unfortunately were not able to include the link in the description for the fundraisers that we usually did, but now that link is back. So I'd rather much like it if y'all donated to the charities in the link below. If you would still like to support the channel, I'm incredibly appreciative of anything that we get because it, of course, helps us to continue making the videos. But if you would like to donate to a charity, make sure to go into the link and donate there. And also, we run a fundraiser every single Sunday, and we've met resounding success. And I have to thank all of y'all once again because we've raised $60,000 collectively now for the American Red Cross and also Doctors Without Borders. And so without speaking too much about that anymore, we're now going to move on to the news from the port of Berdyansk. There has been incredible information that came out today that appears to be rather significant from what we can tell. I actually showed some videos last week. This map, of course, is the new week's map, so it starts on day 1. But if you want to go to yesterday's map, just go click on yesterday's video, click on the link in the description, and you can get to the day 28 map, where you can actually see some evidence that the Russians were unloading troops and cargo and supplies at the port of Berdyansk. Well, it turns out that those videos helped the Ukrainian military sink and destroy multiple Russian ships moored at the port of Berdyansk. From what we know, the Russian ship, the Orsk, has been sunk completely and exploded, while other ships may have been deliberately scuttled after heavy damage to avoid them exploding as well. And so we're not entirely sure yet the extent of damage beyond the Orsk. That's the only thing we know for sure is that the Orsk sank at its mooring. But we don't know how many other ships have been damaged, how badly they were damaged, and if it's true that other ships were scuttled in the harbor to prevent them from exploding. So I'm going to click on this real quick. We're going to take a look at the damage that we can see. In this picture, of course, you can see one of the ships burning in the background. I don't know the exact names of all of them. We haven't been able to sourced that information yet, but one of the landing ships, I'm assuming it's an Udaloy class. Well, let me make sure I get that right. Udaloy class. It is not an Udaloy class. I don't know why I've been saying that all day long, but it is a Russian support ship that is trying to get out of the harbor as fast as possible, probably to try and avoid being hit itself. So now we're going to move on to the other bits of info we've gotten about the sinking of these ships, well, the damage of these ships and the sinking of one in the port, and we can see more footage here of this specific event. So I'm going to show you all this. That is Project 775, which I believe is the ship that we saw in the other picture, but right there, it's trying to leave the port as fast as possible. Over here at the actual port, we can see what may be the Orsk burning in the background and sinking in the process. Once again, I'm not entirely sure how many other ships were damaged. We only know of the Orsk being completely sunk right now and have an actual name to identify that ship. What was most interesting about the Orsk being sunk is that it was actually the first ship to arrive and dock at the port of Berdyansk, and the Russians made a huge deal about this from what I was reading today. I don't watch Russian state media because it's usually a propaganda fest, and if you look at the Orsk, I'll pull it up for y'all. Orsk ship. We want a picture of it alive. If you look at this ship, it looks incredibly old. Maybe we can get a Wikipedia page on this and maybe get a little bit more information about it. Alligator class landing ship. They have two active, and one of them was the Orsk, and now it's listed as sunk. But let's see. Most of them, it appears that the first one was commissioned in 1964. I don't know when the Orsk was built. Doesn't look like we have any specific information on that. But as you can tell, it's an incredibly old ship at this point. It's 74, 84, 94, 2004, 2014. Nearly a 60-year-old ship at this point. So it's not really the most impressive one in terms of age, and also it kind of looks like a Liberty ship. You know, I mean, that's making a large generalization there, but it looks like it's from that same time period of World War II, although this was constructed in the 60s. I know that, everyone, so don't worry about that. But nonetheless, an incredibly old ship, but the Russians made a huge deal about it arriving at Berdyansk because it was the first military ship from the Russian Navy that actually docked there and started to unload supplies and, you know, munitions and such, and soldiers as well. And so it has been sunk by the Ukrainians, so I don't really think that propaganda went over too well for them, and I believe it'll probably bite them in the rear, because now they're going to have to come out and explain to the public what happened to the Orsk, because that's something they really can't well, maybe they can skirt around. Maybe they just ignore that it happened and not really report that to the public. But nonetheless, a lot of people will probably start wondering what happened to the Orsk, considering that news in Russia is so, like, heavily tailored and altered by the government. They'll probably never hear about the Orsk sinking. Nonetheless, we're going to move on to the next video, the final one we have, of the Orsk exploding. Unfortunately, it has no audio, but that is the Orsk right there. And as you can see, it exploded. It appears to have been carrying a decent amount of munitions, a sizable amount. And so the explosion is, of course, representative of that quantity of explosives inside the ship. And it appears that it's still cooking off, as we can see little shells flying around. Very interesting stuff, and it's really interesting to me that the Ukrainians were able to launch these missiles over largely Russian-controlled territory. Wherever the cruise missiles came from, they had to fly over a decent amount of Russian-controlled land in Ukraine to the port, and they weren't shot down, because we've seen a lot of evidence that both sides have a readily available ability in some instances to be able to shoot down the cruise missiles, yet they didn't in this instance, which is very interesting. So we're going to move on to the last bit of news that we've gotten from the port of Berdyansk, where we can see that there is a satellite picture taken of the port. As you can see there, we're going to wait for this to load. A very high definition image. We don't get a lot like these, but you can see here that the Orsk is burning at its mooring. We don't know how many other ships were damaged there. If we can see another one that has like a red coloring to the floor of the hull, I guess you could say. And then we only see that one ship there. This may be, I don't really know what these are. I wouldn't want to call them oil slicks, but we can see that apparently a ship started to make heavy wake, maybe out of the port. And then we can see down here in this little corner one Russian ship appears to have maybe, we're not entirely sure about this, but it may have lost control because it appears that it's just got like a hard rudder going and it's just looping in circles over and over. So I'm not entirely sure what's happening there, but we can tell that apparently some ship is holding at sea and just moving in circles, or it's lost control. I'm not entirely sure, but nonetheless, the damage at the port of Berdyansk that the Ukrainians have inflicted on the Russian Navy and their supply lines has been severe. So we'll have to see how this pans out in the coming days. I'm not really sure what effect this will have on Russian logistics, although one can assume that it will be of some degree. We're not really sure if it's going to be a minor issue for the Russians or a major issue now that a decent amount of the port of Berdyansk is blocked by sunk ships or heavily damaged ones that may have been scuttled to avoid them exploding. So, that's all the news we've gotten about Berdyansk, and that answers the question about what Russian ships sank. And so, if you came here because of the thumbnail, that's the answer. The ships in Berdyansk were attacked by Ukrainian cruise missiles. One of them has sank, and we may have gotten sank. I'm not really sure which way that goes, but we've gotten also several other reports suggesting that the Russians may have scuttled several more because they had been too heavily damaged and they were afraid they were going to explode. And so now that we've covered what happened in Berdyansk, we're now going to move on to the area of Kiev, where we've gotten a lot of interesting information showing a heavy presence of Ukrainian firefighting and the counterattacks succeeding in a way. And we've also seen the increased presence of the Foreign Legion. We're finally getting videos of French Foreign Legion. I'm calling them Foreign Legion. Don't mistake that with like the French Foreign Legion or anything like that. I'm talking about Ukraine's Foreign Legion. But we've had French Foreign Legion there, and we've had American Foreign Legion there in the videos that we got today, and so I'm not going to talk about that too much, because I'm just going to show you all the videos. First off, we've seen some video footage of the Ukrainians in a firefight in the village of Moschin, which does tell us for sure now that the front line is at least in this area around the Irpin Reservoir, and we do have some idea that there may be a sizable amount, several thousand Russian troops that are caught on the southern side of the floodplain on the Irpin River, and so these units may be just trying to close up that pocket and either destroy it or force them to surrender. So I'm going to show you all the video now and give you all an idea of what that firefight is looking like in at least a small area.
Прекратить огонь! Хватит, пішли! Лишаємо двох бойців, блядь! Хто хуярить? Я не понял, блядь!
Не скупчуємося!
Пішли!
Розійдіться! Підходимо!
Наші козаки з Волині прикривають!
Что вы делаем? Артели прошли?
Отставить огонь, мы всех убили! Марсель, ты живый?
Да, вы чё по мне стреляете? Вы чё, гоните, блядь?
Нихуя себе, блядь. Да ты чё, блядь, не кричишь, что ты, блядь? Ты что, по нас хуярил? Ладно, конец связи, блядь. Конец связи, бо нас в натуре тут чуть.
So that video is cut off there. As you can see, though, there's a decent amount of firefighting going on. You can hear the distant sound of artillery. And so it's a little bit different than the Russian videos in a way, at least. And so we at least have a general idea that they are actually near the front lines, because you can hear distant gunfire instead of just their own. So we're now going to move on to the next video of the firefight, a much shorter one, but nonetheless still showing another perspective.
Проходим, блядь! Проходим! Проходим, блядь! Знахар, крий!
So interesting nonetheless that this firefight appears to be incredibly large from what we can tell in the video, although we didn't see the Russians and we don't have any other videos rather than from that one instance of the firefight and two different perspectives of it, but nonetheless very interesting. So now I'm going to take y'all to another video of Ukrainian trenches near Kiev. As we can see, the Ukrainians have dug in as well. These may have been made during the Russian offensive originally during the first few weeks, or they may have been made recently just in case if their counteroffensive goes awry and they need to fall back. Or maybe they're making these right at the front line so that way they can try and hold that ground once their counteroffensive stops or stalls. So I'm going to show you all the video. It's just a quick little tour around. And also I was pretty fine with showing this because it doesn't show any identifying geographical features to give away where this is. So here's the video. I gotta say, you know, what's interesting to me is that when you look at pictures in World War One, and you know, this is all, of course, down to the soil types and everything, and so I'm guessing this is mostly like clay, kind of like you find here in the South. But in France, the trenches wouldn't hold their shape unless if you supported them with some kind of wood. And maybe there's not been a lot of rain, which is interesting because it's Rasputitsa season right now. Maybe there's not been a lot of rain in this one particular spot, and so the trench walls are holding themselves. But what's interesting to me is that these like trench walls are like perfectly cut out. So I don't know how they actually did this. Was this like done by hand or done by machine? Nonetheless, getting beyond all that speculation, this is a very interesting thing to look at and try and marvel at how this trench is holding itself together without any kind of wooden supports or anything like that that you would find in a World War I trench that was in much more wet environments, but still in the soil, you know, obviously. So anyways, I'm going to let the video keep running. So that's the end of that video. We're now going to move on to the rest of the news that we've gotten around the northwestern area of Kiev. And we can see that the Americans have arrived in Kiev. It's really interesting to watch, and it's really weird to finally listen to someone with an American voice. And on top of that, he sounds like one of the voice actors from Call of Duty on the front lines in Kiev. It's just really interesting to me because we haven't heard American voices actually on the front lines in Ukraine yet. The only time that we heard of a quote-unquote American in Ukraine, it was the one guy who was whining that everyone got obliterated, but I'm guessing they didn't, because now we're seeing here in this video that there are Americans there, and they haven't all been obliterated before they even got to the front line. So I'm going to show you all the video.
Now, I don't know if you guys know what this is behind me, but that's a Russian tank. Russian tank that was taken out.
Welcome to America!
Welcome to America.
Very interesting stuff. We also have another video of the Americans once again in this video, so I'm going to show this to y'all as well before I comment on both of them. Stand by. Let me get that full screen for y'all and back that up to the start.
Another day in paradise. Had a couple guys that got shot just a little while ago. Brought him to the rear with a tank. Got my man right there, my commander. He's got the USA patch on the shoulder. Got burning buildings. We got mortars. We got rockets. We got all the fun stuff to make it a beautiful day.
And it's just really weird to me. It sounds actually kind of like the same guy in both videos, but it's really cool to see that the Americans have finally arrived, at least in a small number. We don't really know how many there are yet, but we can see in this video there's at least about 20. It was really cool to me because while the Ukrainians are incredibly good fighters, we've seen that because they've held this country for a month and everyone assumed it would fall within 2 days. We still know the fighting ability of the Americans, and if they have prior military experience, we can assume that they'll be pretty heavy hitters on the battlefield, and they'll have incredibly good organization, and most of them will, of course, remember their training because it's pretty much ingrained in them from then till after their service 20 years later. They can tell you exactly how they were trained when they served in Vietnam, which was like 50 years ago at this point. So I'm sure that the Ukrainians are very happy that the Foreign Legion members seem to be doing incredibly well and actually conducting themselves in a good manner from what we can at least see in the videos, because they're actually on the front, and we haven't seen or heard of any reports of the Foreign Legions wavering or doing poorly. So that's very good to know. But we'll have to get more information in the future, because that's kind of a shaky statement right there, kind of made on assumptions. We don't have a lot more information than just seeing them there. So I'm going to wait for some more information to come out, and we're going to see if they actually hold up to the hype, or if they're just another kind of TDF unit that is held up to a high regard because they're foreign volunteers. But we'll just see. I have high hopes for them. We're now going to move on to the next bit of news that we've seen in the Bucha Irpin area, where we can see pillars of smoke billowing over the Bucha Irpin Hostomel area right here. I'm not really sure what this fire is caused from. I'll get this in a larger screen for y'all. I'm not really sure what this fire is caused from. It's an incredibly large one. We know that for sure because the base of the pillar of smoke looks like it's probably a quarter-mile wide. So I don't really know what's causing that, but nonetheless it looks very thick. So if I was to take any guesses, any shots in the dark at this, I would assume that it is probably an oil fire of some kind, like an oil silo that's been hit and is now caught on fire. We've seen a lot of that in Ukraine, enough so that you can make the general assumption that this is probably some kind of oil-based fire. So we're now going to move on from that picture to the next bit of news that we've gotten in Irpin, and we can see some footage from inside the city of Irpin. We know that there is a Russian kind of like encirclement that has occurred, where the Ukrainian forces have encircled a large number of Russian forces in the Bucha Irpin Hostomel area. But if they were to hold out as long as the soldiers in Mariupol have held out, the Ukrainian ones, that may go on for some time. But who knows? They say that they're heavily demoralized. They may be, so maybe they'll start surrendering very soon. But we'll just have to wait for news to come out in the coming days to see if that's the truth or not. So anyways, I'm going to show you all this footage of some of the damage in Irpin. As you can see here, a whole bunch of civilian vehicles, and now we've moved on to houses burning and destroyed. Very unfortunate. I just hate looking at damage of civilian infrastructure. Well, it's a good thing that it looks like that church was intact, but we'll have to see in a second if they pan back to the church. But I hate to see houses destroyed and so on. And I know I've gone over this a million times, but it just pains me so, because if I was in one of those houses and knew that my house had been destroyed and I wouldn't be able to return back to it after the war, I would feel like my entire life had been uprooted to the point that it was never going to be the same. So I really hate that that's happened to Ukraine and that all this damage just continues to persist. Unfortunately, we couldn't see if the church was damaged. It was a very pretty little church. Of course, and you know, I mean, like, it's probably a very historical building as well. Probably built in like the 17th or 18th century or sometime around there, most likely, based off of what I can assume off of the architecture. And so if it was to be destroyed, it'd be a loss historically. And as a history major, that would pain me as much so as the house is being destroyed as well. So now we're going to move on to the last two bits of news that we've gotten around the Kyiv area, where we can see a massive explosion occurred in Kyiv. Not entirely sure what caused it. They say it was a tank farm. Maybe they got the location wrong, and this was actually the Bucha Irpin Hostomel area, and that's where that giant pillar of smoke was coming from. But regardless, I'm going to show y'all the video. And that's one hell of an explosion right there. Hopefully no one was injured or killed in that explosion, because That was huge. I don't, we're not entirely sure once again. It says probably a tank farm, but we don't have any information beyond the title here. So I don't know what caused that explosion. It could have been a chemical plant or a munitions dump. We don't really know. I'm assuming that a munitions dump wouldn't explode like that, but nonetheless, we don't really know for sure. All we know is that it was an incredibly large explosion in the Kyiv area, and hopefully there was a very small amount of the loss of life. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of news on the eastern side of the city, because it would be kind of ignorant of me to say that there is no fighting going on the eastern side. Russian forces have gotten very close, so I'm going to show y'all some of the destroyed Russian positions that the Ukrainians have pushed them out of today. You can see here that they have what appears to be, from the marking, a captured MTLB. But I'm not entirely sure about that, though. But we can see that Ukrainian forces have destroyed a T-72B3 and apparently routed the Russians from this area.
А вот это затрофеить не получилось. Разъебашили. Есть 200-е, есть 300-е. Не в моих отделениях параллельно. Воюем.
It's a great thing. A lot of people confuse my statement here because they say, oh, you know, some Russians don't really believe in this cause. But when I say it's great to see more Russian vehicles destroyed, I'm saying that in the perspective of their invading military. And so if you see them fail, it's a good thing because you know that Ukraine isn't going to fall. You know, if like, I try and keep things as neutral as possible, but I am pro-Ukrainian. The Russians are the aggressors here, and they're aggressing into a neutral country that had not done any aggressive actions against Russia to solicit this war. And so when I say that it's a good thing to see Russian vehicles get destroyed, I mean it in the context of it's a good thing to know that the Ukrainians are holding their ground and their country won't fall to the Russians and become a puppet state or become annexed, or the government officials will be executed or something like that. So it's a good thing to see that more Russian vehicles have been destroyed. It's great to know that the Ukrainians are making ground in their counterattacks, because as we can see, it appears that they have pushed up to these tanks and where they were, so we know that a decent amount of ground have been made. We're now going to wrap up the northern front, because that's actually all the news we've gotten from Kiev today, and also the Chernihiv area. Once again, I have to go up here and give a disclaimer before we move on, though, that Chernihiv appears to be a lightly fought over area of the front now. I don't know if that's because the Russian logistics are so far stretched that they can't commit to multiple offensives in different areas, and we also know that they're not committing any offensives around Kiev. In fact, they're on the defensive. So this entire northern front may have stalled at this point, and the Russians are just trying to hold on to the ground they've gotten so far while they try and rearrange and manage their logistical issues that, as far as we know in the first and second weeks, appear to have entirely collapsed. That may be the situation right now. We're not entirely sure. We're still trying to get as much information as possible about what's going on the Russian side, but that's very hard to get because the Russians skew their news to a point that they won't show any shortcomings, and it's hard to get that news from the Ukrainian side because the Ukrainians have about as much of a clue about how the Russian side is faring as we do. All we know is that they're being pushed back, and generally all offensives have stalled in the northern front. So, we've actually covered all the news in the northern front. We're about to move on to the eastern front and cover the few location unknowns we've had today, and the Kharkiv area, which has had a few events happen in it today. And so, we're going to move on to the questions. And so, what do we got, Matthew?
Okay, so good evening, chat. I hope everybody's doing well. So the first question we have up tonight is from HT with a $20 donation. He says, what do you think will be the tipping point for Ukraine's victory in this war, and when might we see it?
I believe that the tipping point has kind of already occurred in Mariupol. Because you see, the thing is that I've been saying, and this is entirely all my assumptions based off of like historical knowledge and context, and then applying that to the modern day. Based off of what I'm thinking, I think that Mariupol was the turning point in this war, and the city of Mariupol could fall at this point, and it really wouldn't matter because it's done its purpose in kind of turning the tide of the war. The Russians are being pushed back everywhere in the northern front, eastern fronts, and the southern fronts to a large degree around Mykolaiv. And Mariupol was going to weigh a very heavy part in Russian logistics, as far as we know. Berdyansk, which is the place where the ships were sank today, has a much smaller port and a much smaller capacity for ships That's not the case in Mariupol. Mariupol is a much larger port city compared to that of Berdyansk, and the goal of the Russians, from what we can tell and assume based off of how they've been conducting this war and what's happened so far, their goal was to actually capture the port city of Mariupol, use the ports of the city as a supply base and kind of like a supply depot in a way, so that way they could further ease the logistical issues they're having and push the southern front even better, because they wouldn't be dealing with the supply issues that they're having right now. But the city of Mariupol didn't fall, and it's been holding for weeks. So this port complex in Mariupol has not been able to be used by the Russians because they haven't cleared out the Ukrainians yet to make that a possibility. So what they did is that they had to do something else, and they started to funnel these supply ships into the port city of Berdyansk, because we knew for a long time that there were some Russian support ships in the Sea of Azov just waiting at sea. And now they've moved to Berdyansk because that fleet's no longer present. It's moved over here. And so they're trying to use this much smaller port to alleviate their supply issues in a way, so that way their truck supply lines aren't as long as they already are. And now the cruise missile attacks that happened today have sunk a decent amount of these ships at their moorings, and so now a decent amount of this harbor is unusable, because they're going to have to get crews out there. They're going to have to get support ships there to try and refloat these ships and at least move them out of the way of the dockyard. And that's not going to happen soon, and that's a very lengthy process to refloat a ship. Usually it takes days. And then on top of that, they'd have to get the ships out there and make sure it's safe enough for them to operate, which may be a matter of a week. So now the port of Berdyansk is at incredibly reduced capacity as far as the supplies they can unload, or it's entirely knocked out because all of the mooring areas on the dockyard may be blocked by sunk ships at this point. So now they have no way to conduct any sort of ship side resupplies of their land forces, and so now the logistics situation may be incredibly worse. So I believe that this was the turning point in the war, was Mariupol. If they collapsed now, of course the supplies would get through on the Russian side, but I'm not really sure if it would be in time, because they're getting pushback everywhere. We know, and I'll get to this later, we'll touch on this later on in the news, that Ukrainian MLRS attacks are now hitting the Kherson airport again, which means that the Ukrainian forces are close, and they may be launching an assault back into the city to try and retake it. So with all those things being thought out, and how important the southern front is, because it appeared to be the most mobile one, and there's a majority of larger Ukrainian cities just within reach if they were able to push this a little bit more successfully, and they can't, based off of what we're seeing here with the supply side issues. So I believe that that was the turning point of the war, and I believe it's kind of already happened in a way. But then again, this is all my assumption. It's kind of based off of what I've known so far and been trying to collect daily on this war, because I sit here every day and just look at it. And I think that that was the turning point. We'll have to see in the coming days, though, if that was the case. I may be entirely wrong. The turning point may have not been reached yet, or it may never be reached, and the Russians may actually take more ground in the coming days and maybe fix the supply issue. But at the moment, that's what I'm assuming. So I hope I answered that question really well, and I hope that gave everyone in the chat a pretty good idea of what I'm thinking is going on right now as far as the logistical issues. And so I thank you very much for the support. That was an incredibly good question, and so we're going to move on to the next one.
All right, and the next question is from Andrew Parker. He puts in an $18 donation. He says, how are the foreign legion groups structured and organized?
Well, that's an incredibly interesting question, and it's very specific as well. Are you trying to get some information for a guy named Putin? I'm just kidding, but we don't entirely know. I don't know how they're organizing it. Maybe they're organizing it in a way that's familiar to the countries that the volunteers are coming from. So the American legions kind of organize themselves in an American fashion, and the French organize themselves in the French fashion. I'm not entirely sure. We don't have a lot of information about that, because that information is kept a close secret by the Ukrainians. We can see that it's bitten them in the butt sometimes to allow them to even use phones. Because, for example, at the Kiev mall, someone took a picture, and I was looking to get a link for that today, but due to time restraints, I wasn't able to do that. But someone took a picture around the Kiev mall that showed that Ukrainian forces were there for a short while, and then the Russians airstrike the mall, and 8 people were killed, 8 civilians were. So I don't really think they'd be privy to give out that kind of information because it may give the Russians an idea of how they're actually functioning and what specific parts of these units to target if they have that kind of discretion. So I'm not entirely sure. But I thank you very much for the support, and it's a very interesting question. So we're going to move on to the next question.
And I just want to quickly recognize a donation without a comment from David Williams. He puts in a donation of $18. David, thank you very much for the support. Next up is a question from none other than Mark Bohychuk with a $13 donation. He says, how much of the Black Sea is considered Ukrainian waters? Is it like 20 kilometers like most countries? Also waiting for the enforcer coffee mugs.
Oh, well, I'm glad that a lot of people are thinking about merch. I'm not really sure what we're going to do about that, though, because it seems like there's a big push for it. Let me know in the chat if that's what y'all want, because it seems like a lot of people have been saying that recently. So if y'all want it, I don't know, maybe we'll give it to y'all. Yes, the Black Sea waters, I'm not really sure what the Black Sea territorial waters are for Ukraine. So let's pull up a map and see if we can get an idea of what it looks like. So this looks like a pretty solid map. So it appears that Ukraine, that looks a lot more than 20 miles right here to me. Let me go see if I can actually find like a little short description about how the territorial waters work. Let's see, we'll go to BBC. I'm not a big fan of mainstream news, but I trust them a little bit more than most news organizations. Okay, so is there a specific map here that tells us how this works? No, there isn't. I think the best I can get you right now, not that, the best I can get you right now is this one map right here. So if you would like to pause the video and take a good look at that, because I believe that this is what the Russians claim in red, and the yellow areas are what the Ukrainians claim. So that's really all I can tell you about the territorial waters. I'm not exactly an expert on everything, so I do have to say I'm ignorant on some things. And international waters and how, international waters and territorial waters is something I'm kind of ignorant on. So I hope this answers your question to a good bit. But that being said, I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and the next question is from Captain Chris 1220. He puts in a $10 donation and says, this war is dragging out, so are my donations. Thanks for doing this, man.
Well, thank you very much for the support, and if you feel like you can't support the channel, there's no pressure to. It helps me keep running, though, but if you can't, that is totally fine. And also, by the way, I would be much more happy if y'all would make sure to help out the fundraisers that we do on Sunday. So if you're kind of like wanting to help out in some way, my channel or the fundraisers, make sure to help out the fundraisers a bit more. We do those every single Sunday, and we pick a charitable organization that's currently active inside of Ukraine. So make sure to check in on the Sunday night streams, and make sure to donate to the fundraisers if you're kind of undecided as to what you should do, support the channel or support organization in Ukraine. But I thank you very much for the support, and I'm sorry that it's getting a little stretched. It's like reporting this war is getting tiresome for me as well, because it's day 29 and I've not had a break from doing this for a month. But I'm more than glad to do it because I still have a friend over there who's stuck in Ukraine because he's over the age of 18 and he's a male, so he can't leave. So I thank you very much for the support once again. It helps me out a lot, and I'm glad that you've been a continued supporter of the channel. And so thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from S. Moore with a $10 donation. They say, missile-struck ships or other. Also, a swift boat was really damaged 3 days ago. $10 equals 1/2 Fraser sockeye salmon.
What is up with the sockeye salmons? Thank you very much for the support, but I don't understand. Like, why do so many people make jokes about the sockeye salmon? I don't know where it came from. Like, I don't know the origin story behind that. And Matthew and me have been trying to figure that out for days. We're like, what is up with the sockeye salmon stuff? Because we get the other ones, you know, like That Being Said, Leaf Springs. We understand all of those because we saw those develop. But the sockeye salmon thing, I don't understand. Like, I would love for y'all to like let me know in the chat what that's about, because I'm kind of lost. But thank you once again for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and the next question up for the night is from Aaron Foster with a $20 donation. He says, thanks for putting these videos out. I'd like to give a shout out to Bo of the Fifth Column, who's my main source in explaining a lot of the foreign policy. Have you ever considered a collab either with him or others?
I have considered collabs, but I'm not really sure how they would work, considering that my streams are done at kind of like an odd time of the day, just because of how like scheduling works and stuff, and it also allows me the entire waking day here to gather up all the information. But I've been thinking about it a little bit and bringing on someone new. We actually had a poll about that on the channel, and it was an overwhelming majority that it'd be nice to have a guest speaker on for like 20 minutes or so. I'm not really sure how that'll work, though. We'll probably have to cut down the question times, or we'll have to cut down the news, and I don't really think cutting down the news is a smart idea, so we'll probably cut into the question time a little bit to keep the stream shorter. And so I thank you very much for the support, and that's kind of where we're at on that, and so we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from S. Moore once again with another $10 donation. He says, okay, here's the other half of the sockeye salmon. $10 equals tail half of that earlier salmon. My question is, towns are being retaken, and which towns around the capital are being retaken?
Right now, as we know, Moschun is currently being fought over right now, so that may have been retaken. The areas of Hostomel, Bucha, and Irpin are kind of halfway in between Ukrainian control and Russian control, because we know that there are Russian forces currently caught up in those towns, but we don't really know exactly what the Ukrainians control outside of Kiev, but we can assume that they control the Stary Petrivsky, and they also control Novi Petrivsky as well. I'm sorry if I butchered the pronunciation of both of those, but we do know that they've pretty much reached the Irpin Dam again, at least on the reservoir side of the front. So we're not entirely sure, but we will try and get some more solid information in the future. Unfortunately, that's really difficult because of how the fog of war works. But I hope I answered that question really well, at least as best as I can. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question of the night is from Jason Rust. He puts in a $10 donation and says, thank you for all that you do to bring us the news in Ukraine. And oh, by the way, I think I've heard that the Ukrainians are starting to use leaf spring to beat back the Russians.
Oh man, yeah, they're never going to give me a break on that from now on. I think that's just something that will be caught in the channel. But I thank you very much for the support, and it does appear that they're beating them back. I think it's for that though, but they are beating them back nonetheless. So I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to 2 more questions, and then we're going to return to the news because I know a lot of y'all are chomping at the bits for the news.
Okay, and the next question is from Duncan VR with an $8 donation. He says, Sydney News says Russian troop losses are more like 20 to 40,000 if you include MIA and AWOL, etc. And finally, they say Ukraine forces pushing Ruski back. Here is beer money. Enjoy.
Thank you very much. I'm thankful for the support. And yes, as far as we know, the actual amount of killed Russian soldiers is incredibly high because now NATO is also confirming that it's probably around 15,000 Russian soldiers that have been killed, not just wounded and injured, killed alone. So you can always assume that there's about twice as many that were killed that were wounded. So that would put that number probably up around that ballpark. That's about, that's like a quarter of their initial invasion force that's probably been put out of the war due to, woundings or killings. But that's an incredibly interesting thing to think about, and I wonder if they're trying to replenish those numbers, or if they've decided that they just couldn't supply any additional reinforcements, and so they're just letting this kind of like thinning occur, so that way they can hopefully get the supply side of things a little under control, at least for the units that are left, or the amount of them that's there. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope I answered that a little bit and kind of elaborated on it. And so we're going to move on to the last question of this segment.
And the last question of the segment is from Mikara with a $10 donation. They say, please give a shout out to the new help.gov.ua website that was set up. You can donate directly to the armed forces or send needed aid. Just be careful with Red Cross. Their head was seen with Lavrov. I
saw that the other day. Doesn't look like we can actually pull up that website. I was going to see about it, but I did see that, and we are kind of looking at that situation. But nonetheless, the Red Cross is active in Ukraine, and the Red Cross doesn't really, I'm going to kind of like speak in their defense a little bit. The Red Cross doesn't really pick sides. They kind of just try and be friends with everyone, really. I mean, like, hell, they go into North Korea and they help out North Koreans, you know, and there's a whole bunch of things and reasons why you wouldn't help out the North Korean government in any way, because they have a history of backstabbing people, but that's just the Red Cross. They go everywhere and do everything. And so that's kind of like, I guess, the fault in a way, you know, is that people start looking at them in a bad light when they're even helping out the enemies of the West at the moment, or the world in a way, as far as Russia's concerned. But I mean, like, that's just kind of the Red Cross, at least in my opinion, and historically, because in World War I as well. Let me add some historical context to this. The Red Cross was active both in France and Germany in World War I. You know, and that's the literal two opposite sides, the Entente and the Central Powers, or the Axis later on, as it was called in the war, and they were there in both of them. Wait a minute, I'm sorry, I don't think that was the Attain, I think it was Triple Alliance. Whatever, you'll get the picture. So, that being said, that's kind of like my stance on the Red Cross, but we'll take a look into that suggestion that you made, and thank you very much once again for the support. And now we've gone through the first question segment, and we're going to move on to the location unknowns here and the Eastern Front as a whole. There's not really a lot to it, so we may actually make the next question segment really short and just move on to the Southern Front. So, we've gotten only 4 location unknowns today, and out of like 32, 33 bits of news, this is an incredibly low amount. It's like nothing. So we've been able to find locations for most everything that happened today. Here we can see some French foreign volunteers fighting in Ukraine. I'm going to show you all this right now. It's very interesting.
You okay? Yes, man, I'm okay. Right. I'm ready. Good. I'm ready to rumble. Let's ready to rumble.
Where are they? Are they close?
What?
They are close now.
The bastards are striking us. They're trying to destroy our artillery. We're going to answer back. We're going to massacre them.
It's very interesting to hear the fervor he's got. He's pretty gung-ho to go at it. And the volunteers as a whole, the Americans and the French ones we've seen so far, and hopefully we can see more of them as time goes on in the videos, they seem super gung-ho to just get out there and do everything. And hopefully that actually keeps up in the middle of the fighting. We know that usually, historically, Americans have incredibly high morale, as well as the French. The French, although they're the butt of jokes due to the Battle of France in World War II, they have incredibly great morale if you look at their historical performance. And so hopefully these two countries carry that through in their volunteer forces that have arrived in Ukraine, and we'll see them carry through on that and hopefully be a great asset to the Ukrainian side. So we're going to move on from that to the next bit of location unknown news we've gotten today, which is a video from the cockpit, or the HUD, of an Mi-28 doing a missile strike. So I'm going to show you all this right here. Or more like a rocket attack. But anyways, y'all get the picture.
Попал. 4, 3, 2, 1. Отходим.
There's not really much to comment about on that video. It's just the HUD footage of an Mi-28. So we're going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see a large explosion in an unknown location. I'll show you all this right here.
Йоу! БК в бехі в'їбав їхній.
Это что, стропиры?
Слава Україні, підарас.
Not really sure what that explosion was or what caused it. We just know that it sounds like there are Ukrainians in the video, because they're, of course, saying the usual things like Heroam Slava and so on. So hopefully, whatever that was that exploded was not Ukrainian and it was Russian. But nonetheless, we don't really have a lot of information about that explosion itself. And so we're going to try and get something to tie that somewhere. But then again, that usually never happens. So don't be counting on that. All we know is that an explosion happened in an unknown location from an unknown source. Now we're now going to move on to the last bit of location unknown news, where we can see a confrontation in between Ukrainian citizens and Russian soldiers. Not really sure where this happened, and I'm not really sure what's happening in the video. Unfortunately, I couldn't run this by translators due to when this was found and added, but here's the video.
Вообще перепуганный или что? Да успокойся! Да успокойся, что ты делаешь? Успокойся, друже! Друже, тут народні депутати, журналісти, будь ласка, опусти! Народ, дайте йому, що ви робите? Та успокойся, ти опусти оружие! Та успокойся, ти дебіл! Що ти робиш, блін? Що ти робиш?
I'm just trying to take a look here because while this was uploaded today, I'm finding it interesting one thing. Let's pan back to it. I don't see any armbands on these Russians, and so I don't really know. Let's just watch the rest of the video because I'm thinking that someone tried to pull a fast one today when I was looking over the information. You know, like just uploading this on the internet and trying to credit it as modern footage. I think this may have been from the Donbass crisis in 2014 and the annexation of Crimea, but I'm not entirely sure. Before I pass that judgment, let's look at the rest of this video and see if that is the case. Now, I actually saw an armband on that guy over there. Yeah, this is the present day. Actually, I don't think that was an armband. Whatever, we're just going to watch the rest of the video because I'm not sure if this happened now or in 2014 or what anymore. But nonetheless, it's Ukrainians facing off Russians. So I'm going to err on the side, I'm going to say with the doubt in mind that this is probably the present day. We'll just go with that for now. And if we find any information later to prove that wrong, we'll correct it. Actually, I'm going to stop. I'm actually going to reverse what I said just a second ago. I just looked at that guy right here. This is obviously not modern day. I don't know who tried to upload this where I usually look for my information and pass this as a modern day occurrence, but it's obviously not. So we're going to move on from that video because it's pretty much bogus. We're now going to move on down to the Sumy area where we can see that nothing has happened today, of course. Sumy has become an incredibly quiet place. We hardly get any news out of Sumy, and so I'm assuming, once again, like every other day, that nothing has actually happened here. So, I mean, like, that's really it. Nothing's happened here, once again. They're just sitting there. The Russians are, of course, have captured this area, and they've moved down towards Troistinets, but we haven't even heard anything come out of Troistinets. So I'm not sure if they've stalled entirely, and they're just sitting still. Maybe they're digging in because the supplies are, their supply situation is so poor that launching an offensive would be incredibly risky because they wouldn't be able to recover from it if it faltered. I'm not entirely sure, but as of right now, nothing has happened here in the Sumy, Troistinets, Okturka area. So we're now going to move on down to Kharkiv, where a little bit's happened today, but once again, not much. We don't get any ideas of Russian offensives or even Russian bombardments today. We didn't even see any videos of that, at least in my information gathering through today. So all we've got is these two different separate videos. Well, actually we did see that the Kharkiv airport was bombed, but we didn't see any direct artillery strikes on the city of Kharkiv like we've been seeing for weeks now. It went silent today from what we can tell, and here we can see that there were more Russian tanks destroyed around the Kharkiv area. So I'm going to show you all this. You see right there. Apparently they're looking at this through a computer, recording it on a phone, and now I'm showing it to you on another computer. But you can see here that the Russian tanks are destroyed and burning in the distance. Looks like some kind of ammo cook-off or an explosion occurred there. A rather large explosion right there. And so that's all we got on that, is that Russian tanks were destroyed. It appears that they had major ammunition explosions inside of the tanks, which made them explode in the fashion you saw in the video. And that's all we've got for that. So we're now going to move on to the last bit of video we've gotten from the Eastern Front. And this is the fastest, I just gotta say this. Sorry for the small talk, everyone, but this is the fastest we've ever covered the Eastern Front ever. Nothing happened here today at all. Just like nothing has happened offensively in the northern areas of Ukraine and around Chernihiv and Kyiv. And so, going off of that, considering that there is a lack of information from the Ukrainians that there are any ongoing firefights, a lack of information from Russian state TV that makes it to us, showing that they are winning anywhere and gaining ground, I'm assuming that they have done nothing today at all. Over the past 24 hours, the Russians have completely stalled generally everywhere, and now they're resorting to limited artillery bombardments, trying to defend the ground that they've taken, or in the case of Kharkiv, trying to still destroy airports through cruise missile strikes and artillery bombardments if they're able to do them. And I kind of consider those passive actions because that doesn't really require a massive effort in terms of logistics. You know, artillery and cruise missiles are pretty much a fire and a one and done kind of deal, at least, and as compared to infantry that would have to move and they'd have to eat, there would have to be gas for the vehicles, ammunition for those vehicles, parts for them. You know, that's less passive than just firing artillery or cruise missiles or something of that nature, because that's a lot easier to manage logistically, I'm assuming. So nonetheless, we're going to move on to the last video of the Eastern Front, which is the Kharkiv airport being bombed. We'll probably have to wait some time to get any sort of news and kind of like story about the damage that was caused at the Kharkiv airport. All we know is that at that moment it was being stricken by Russian bombs or artillery or missiles. So we'll just have to wait for the coming days to see what we can get out of that and see the actual damage that was caused. I'm not really sure if it was minor or severe. We'll just have to wait. And so we've actually covered all of the news on the Eastern Front now, which was incredibly quick. It took us like 20 minutes maybe. And so now we're going to move on to the Southern Front. But before we do, we're going to answer a really small amount of questions, but I'm going to make sure to try and keep the news rolling. So we're going to do about 4 or 5. And so that being said, what do we got, Matthew?
Okay, so we have a question from Leaf Spring Army. They put in a donation of a combined $40, and they say, staying anonymous here, but I work at a large Wall Street firm, and I am involved with hunting Russian oligarch assets for sanctioning. Your channel has been my evening background music as I flag their accounts. Slava Ukraine.
Well, thank you very much for the support, and I'm glad that you enjoy watching my news as you're flagging down Russian oligarchs' assets. That's very interesting to me, and I thank you very much for the support. That's really neat. And so I don't really have much to add to that, but thank you once again. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Rabid Squirrel Garage. He puts in a donation of $25 and says, thanks for the info. I hope everyone stays safe out there.
Well, thank you very much for the support, and I'm glad that you continue to enjoy our channel and what we do. And if all of y'all enjoy what we're doing, make sure, if you haven't subscribed, to subscribe, so that way you can get notified whenever this stream comes on. It comes on every single day at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. 10 minutes after, though, so it's really like 10:10 Eastern Time. And also make sure to like the video, because the more likes we get, the more this reaches more people, and the more people can hear the news as of what we've gotten today in terms of video evidence, for the most part. But I thank you very much for the support once again, and so we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question of the night is from Alan. He puts in a donation of $10 and says, thanks for doing this. I saw an interview of a Ukrainian tank mechanic. He smiled, saying that they are going out on a safari in the forest looking for Ruskies, deserters, and the like. Have you heard anything?
I haven't actually heard anything about that in particular, and there's a lot of stuff that happens, and if you saw that on the mainstream news, I probably didn't see it because I don't watch mainstream news much, or at all for that matter, and so I haven't actually heard about that if you saw that on mainstream news. So thank you very much for the support once again, and I'm sorry I really couldn't elaborate on that any further. But that being said, we're going to move on to 2 more questions, and then we're going to start covering the news in the Southern Front.
Okay, and the next question is from Gavin Summers with a donation of $10. He says, do you think there's any chance of an eventual Ukrainian offensive on Russian lands?
No, I would completely rule that out. This is a defensive war, and considering the amount of land that Ukraine would have to cover to actually make Russia sign some kind of peace agreement in their favor, it would be a little bit too much, and I believe that would be too daunting for the Ukrainian military to do. The best thing that they could do is push the Russians back to the border and then just leave it there, because at that point they're in a perfect kind of like position for peace talks, because they've once again reclaimed all of their lands and the Russians have no holdings inside of the country anymore. So I hope that answered that question in a way. I just don't think that would be possible, me personally, and that's being entirely truthful and looking at the facts as what they are. While the Ukrainians are holding their ground impressively, conducting an offensive is kind of another thing. So we're going to move on to the last question, and then we're going to start covering the news in the southern front.
And it is that time of the night again. It is a question from Knuckles with a donation of $20. He says, Zelensky told NATO to either give him or sell him 1% of their planes, missiles, and other military aid because they are desperately in need. If they are doing so well, why are they so desperate for this equipment?
That's a good question. While they are doing well, of course, they always run out of equipment, and the Ukrainian Air Force was a very small force to start off with, and I'm sure, although we don't have official numbers, that their Air Force has been dwindling in size throughout the entirety of this war, because aircraft have been shot down left and right, both on the Ukrainian side and the Russian side, so I'm sure that their Air Force is down to just bare bones amount of aircraft. And so while their success right now is incredibly good, they are always trying to make sure that in the end, they are able to keep on pushing everything in terms of what they need. And so aircraft are very important in conducting offensives and also helping to support your forces in a defensive as well. Really, aircraft are important altogether. And so they're trying to make sure that they can get more of these aircraft so that way they can replace the losses that they've currently sustained. So thank you very much for the question. And the Ukrainians so far are winning. In most places of the country, they are retaking ground. But that is a good question, and I thank you very much for the support once again, Knuckles. You've always been a return supporter of the channel, and it helps me out so much because it helps me to continue to run this channel. And so, now we've covered the last question in this question segment, and we're going to move on, to the southern front. So the first place we're going to go is Denepro. We don't have any video evidence to support this yet, but I heard it today, and so I wanted to make sure to put down a note that there have been possible missile attacks on a military base in Denepro. From what I heard, there was around 2 cruise missiles that struck the Ukrainian military base in the city of Denepro. We don't have any more information beyond that, whether it's true or any video evidence to support that claim, but I wanted everyone to know that right now, so that way if there is evidence in the future, we generally have an idea that it happened on day 29 and not day 30 if we get videos about that later. So we're now going to move on to the Donetsk and Luhansk area where we've got no news today. I'm not sure if that's suggesting that the Russians have also stalled here, but nonetheless no news has been received. But the only thing we've gotten today is the DNR captured a Ukrainian peon. I'm not really sure how that's pronounced, but nonetheless we can see here that there is a DNR soldier, and he's standing beside a peon with the Ukrainian cross on it, the Ukrainian Armed Forces cross. So we know that this is a Ukrainian one for sure, and it's interesting to think about how this was captured. I'm not really sure the extenuating circumstances that led to its capture, but nonetheless, interesting to see. So we're going to move on to Mariupol, where we've heard a decent amount of news today. Well, not as much as other days, but a decent amount nonetheless. And we're going to start off with the Chechens fighting inside of the city. We've been getting loads of footage because I think this is the only place that the Russians are doing anything slightly successful. And so we've been getting loads of footage of the Kharkiv Chechens fighting in the area of Mariupol. So I'm just going to let y'all see the footage and let y'all, of course, see for like the 3rd day in a row just footage of the Chechens fighting in Mariupol. Unlike other videos, I'm going to have to say this one here is probably actually not really faked and pretty authentic, because you could see in the prior part of this video just about 20 seconds before, well really 10, that you could actually see bullets kind of like chipping away at the cement of that building beside him. So we can generally assume that this must be a real firefight that they recorded in the city, unlike other instances that we've seen where we heard nothing but their own gunfire from that unit in the video. So I'm going to let the video continue.
الله أكبر دخر والله أخ ما سيلا الله يلا حاجة ما كنت وضع كيف عموا سوغل هيك قاعدين صوصة بعشتلي بحاجة الله أكبر هرش عمو problem لدوم في اليوم نخ بيرتع دخل بوم لا مو انت تشيدهم هذا يقطع دولوي شيدهم ديسنق يزود أليش كوات على الشاتر زور سمرتان أتيجا شو أليش الله ده لا تبغى جنبونا الله ده يبغى ويزنك.
So now the video is cut to another part of the city. An explosion has resounded in the background, and we can see what appears to maybe be a Russian Tiger driving down the street. So that's actually the end of that video, but as you can see, the fighting is still ongoing for the city of Mariupol, and it appears that the Chechens have a heavy presence there, because we've seen loads of videos come out of them, which may suggest that they make up a large percentage of the force, or they're the part of the force that is propaganda-worthy in the Russians' eyes. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of news we've gotten in Mariupol, which is Russian tanks that were destroyed by the Ukrainians. Here in this footage, it appears that a drone was being a spotter, either for itself to drop explosives on the group of trucks. Sorry if I kind of butchered that there, but nonetheless, I'm just going to let y'all watch the video. As we can see, the explosions start to rock the trucks, and we can see that Russian soldiers, I'm supposing, are starting to run away from the trucks that have just been hit. So that's the end of that video. Interesting to see, and I find it kind of weird. I don't really know why those trucks were in the city. I'm not really sure if they were supply trucks or what, but you would think that they'd probably be farther outside of the city, at least on the very outskirts of town, unless if the Russians have made it a decent way into the town, and this is considered far back to them now. I'm not really sure which way that could go. Maybe that was just poor planning and incompetence on their part again, but that's kind of like the flip side. Either it's a bad thing for the Ukrainians, or is a good thing, because either they're being pushed back really bad in the city, and now this is considered far away from the front lines, or the Russians are just incompetent and they put these supply trucks pretty much right up on the front lines to be hit. Either way, interesting video to see, and an interesting bit of news nonetheless. And so we're now going to move on to the last bit of news we've gotten in Mariupol, which is more footage of destroyed tanks. I'm going to show you all this right here. Also, what's interesting to me is that we've seen Ukrainian forces go from the yellow armbands to now they've gone to blue. That's a very interesting change to me, and it seems like something that they've done nearly overnight, because we're hardly seeing yellow armbands or any sort of yellow markings anymore, and it's now all gone to exclusively blue nearly. As we can see, another T-72B3 has been destroyed, but anyways, I'm going to let the video continue.
Другий танк российский уходит в музей Поле чудес. В музей Поле чудес отправляется танк. Ну трошки его подлатать, а так пушка главное работает. Да что выбросить? Пулемет там снять. Уже сняли.
Also looks like there's a couple of other tanks that have been destroyed in the background. It's just that they're focusing on this one. But we can count what appears to be another two T-72B3s. If we go a little bit further back in the video, let me just make sure I saw this right. Right out there, it looks like it may have been a fourth tank as well. So if that's 4 T-72B3s that have been wiped out in just that one area alone, that is a decent amount of losses that the Russians have endured in terms of actual armor in just that one spot. So we can get a good idea And we've known this already, but we can still see that the idea is supported that the Russians are taking heavy material losses trying to fight for Mariupol, and so the city of Mariupol is at least completing its job in one way in its defense, and that's eating up Russian supplies and equipment. So anyways, the video will continue.
Це був танк окупантів, а став танк визволителів, який зараз буде ось цією пушкою лупить по москалям.
So now we're going to get out of Mariupol because that's all the news we've gotten today. We don't really know the actual situation as of today. I'm not really sure if the Russians have gained any more ground, as in roads or streets. All we know is that the city is still holding at the moment, and we're not really sure how much longer it will hold, whether it be hours, days, weeks, or months. I'm not entirely sure. We'll just have to see in the coming days if we get any information to suggest if the town is going to fall very soon, or if it's still going to hold out for quite some time. So now, with that being said, and I know everyone loves that phrase, we're going to pass Berdyansk. Well, actually, I'm going to cover it again because a lot of people may have just joined the stream and may be wondering what the thumbnail is about. And so I'm going to cover it one more time, but it'll be in brief. In the city of Berdyansk today, there was a large strike at the naval port. I'll show you all the most important bits. The ship, the Orsk, the Russian landing ship, the Orsk, was hit in its mooring and sunk. We know that there may have been several other ships that were heavily damaged. Here we can see Project 775 trying to escape the port. But there may have been a couple of other ships that were heavily damaged and were scuttled in the harbor as well. So this harbor may not be able to be used anymore for resupplies. So we're going to move on to the next bit of video to further this point and show y'all what happened there. And we can see in this video the explosion of the Orsk itself at the mooring. So this video is quiet, but as you can see, the cargo hold of the ship exploded from what it appears, with ammunition kind of like flying about on fire. And so we know that the Orsk sank on the pretty much on the dock where it was right there. And so that part of the dock won't be able to be used anymore. And this is considered pretty important, important enough that this made the news all day everywhere, including here, because it's a very big deal, because this was going to be an important part of the Russian supply line, is either the port at Mariupol, and then I guess they went with their backup plan, which was the port of Berdyansk. But now Berdyansk, as far as we know, may be entirely closed off, and they won't be able to use that supply port anymore, because the ships there have sank at the dock, and so they can't bring any more ships up to the dock to actually unload the cargo and supplies they have. And so now the Russian supply situation in the south may get a lot worse. So we're going to move on beyond that, and we're now going to move on to the area of Kherson, where we can hear the sound of Ukrainian MLRS attacks hitting the airport in the area. So I'm going to show you all that real quick. You can kind of see it in the distance, the flash of the MLRS rockets exploding on impact. But you can tell that it's a rather large explosion, actually. Well, a rather large attack in a way. So that's the end of that video. You can get the idea that the artillery barrage that the Ukrainians are conducting is incredibly intense, and they may be launching an attack onto the city within the coming days, considering that the artillery is probably supporting some kind of push, and they may actually retake the city of Kherson, which will be a severe blow to the Russians in this area, because Kherson is their connection to the interior of Ukraine, and if they lose Kherson, the forces that have pushed beyond that we may know about. I haven't actually marked that on the map as front lines yet, because we haven't gotten any video evidence to show that they are anywhere outside of Kherson. But if they actually are, and they get cut off, that means that the Ukrainians have now encircled a decent pocket of Russian troops that won't have any way of supply or any way to escape. So we're now going to move on to the last bit of information out of Mykolaiv before we move on to Crimea, where we can see that the Russians appear to be using old field dressings from 1978. I'm going to move on to the next picture here, and you can see it, although it was in blue there, that it says 1978 on it. That is an old field dressing. Like, golly, let me think about that. 1988, 98, 2008, 2018. That's like a 40-something-year-old field dressing. Like, that thing is so old that your dad may have actually, like, if you were in Russia, your dad may have actually held that, and then you were carrying it inside of a medical kit or something like that in the present day. That's really weird. Also, let's see if it says anything Soviet on it, considering it was made in Soviet times. Yeah, I can't really read Russian too well or too quickly to know if it does. But that's really interesting that they have such old field dressings being used at the front. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of news we've seen at Sevastopol. Maybe the Ukrainians will start trying to hit these ships launching the cruise missiles near Sevastopol with cruise missiles, kind of like a cruise missile on cruise missile attack there. But anyways, we've gotten a video of a ship launching more cruise missiles today, and so I'm going to let y'all see that. So that's kind of self-explanatory. Kind of went over that yesterday for all my return viewers. But nonetheless, Russian ships have been launching cruise missiles in the Sevastopol area since yesterday, as far as we can tell on video, and it appears they are launching them en masse. We don't know their specific targets or where these cruise missiles are heading, but all we can tell is that they're being launched from the area of Sevastopol at sea. So we're going to move on now to the international news, because we've covered all the news inside of Ukraine now, and we've seen some interesting things occur in Belgium today as the President of the United States arrived to discuss concerns and matters with NATO about what's going on inside of Ukraine. And it appears that today we have finally gotten an answer to the question that's been asked so much on this channel: what is the red line for the U.S. to get involved? That was laid out today because the President of the United States said that the Russians using chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons will invoke a military response from the United States and its allies in NATO. That tells us that that is the red line right there. It doesn't have to be a missile landing in NATO territory or anything like that. If the Russians begin to use chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons, that will lead the U.S. into this war. And so we have the red line, and we'll have to see if the Russians cross that red line. Because we know that the U.S. will probably not back... Well, of course, the U.S. will not back down at that point. They have now laid out kind of like the ultimatum. If those are used, we are going to war. So that gives y'all a good idea. And it also gives me a good idea now of what's going to happen, because I wasn't really sure if anything would lead the U.S. into the war, because last night people were asking, well, what if he uses like a small nuke in Ukraine like Putin? What will happen then? And I said, I really don't know. I mean, like, the response from the West would probably be incredibly strong, but I'm not really sure. And now we can see that the response from the West would be all-out war. So now we're going to move on to the next bit of news that came out of this conference today, and that is the President of the United States demands to boot Russia from G20. G20 is kind of a trade forum of the largest countries in the world, the 20 largest countries in the world economically, and it's kind of where they discuss I guess, ideas on trade. It's not like a trade organization. It's called a trade forum, which is very interesting. I'll have to look into that a little bit more and try and get y'all a definition of what a trade forum means as compared to a trade federation or something like that. But nonetheless, the G20 accounts for 90% of the world's gross world product, which is the overwhelming majority, minus 10% of it. And so if Russia was removed from this, the idea is that this will further destabilize the Russian economy, which has already shrunken to half its size from what it was before this war. So we can tell that if they were removed from the G20, which may be another severe blow to the Russian economy, that may cause even more problems for them. Now we're going to move on to the last bit of news. And this stream may actually be short tonight because we've wrapped up the news pretty quickly. But the last bit of news from tonight, which is the U.S. has said they will take refugees. The U.S. has pledged today that they'll accept 100,000 Ukrainian refugees who have been displaced from the war. And I'm very happy to see that the United States has drawn a line in the sand and said that the Russians will not cross this line and that they're now also taking Ukrainian refugees. It shows that the stance from the United States has now become stronger, and it lets us know that the president held up his word, that he would wait for a month to see how well the sanctions were taken by Russia, and if Russia has not ceased their actions at that point, further sanctions and further action will be taken. And now we can see that that action has been delivered upon. So that being said, we've actually covered all the news for today, and so now we'll be taking questions for the rest of the night. And so that being said, how many super chats do we have, Matthew?
So it looks like we're sitting at about 17.
All right, so let's get through those, and then we're going to answer some questions from the chat.
Okay, so next up is a super chat from David Crow 2 for $10. He says, leaf springs as IEDs, perhaps.
That's pretty funny. I don't really know how effective those would be, but nonetheless, everyone loves leaf springs, so I'm sure that the Ukrainians will find a good use for them. But I thank you very much for the support, and I love that you're still committed to the bit in a way. We're going to see about encouraging that in some ways, but I don't want that to become a dead joke because it's used so much. But I thank you nonetheless, and so we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a $10 donation from Ken Harford. He says, coffee for all.
Thank you very much. I'm glad that you're helping out the coffee fund. Is very important because I drink a coffee about an hour before each stream every night, and so it helps me out a lot, and I'm glad that you continue to support that kind of bad habit in a way. But thank you nonetheless for the support. It continues to help me run this channel, and so we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is another question from Knuckles. He puts in another $10 donation. He says, also not to mention, we don't see many vids of Ukraine equipment being destroyed. Could it be that it is being kept from us? Continuing from my last comment, and here's my donation for the night.
I don't really think it's being kept from us per se, and thank you very much for the return donations, but I don't really think it's being kept from us. I just believe that the Russians are destroying such a lower amount of Ukrainian vehicles compared to the amount the Ukrainians are destroying of Russian vehicles, that there's really not much video to be seen. And I've been trying to include as much as possible lately to try and give an accurate depiction of the Ukrainian losses versus Russian losses, but we just don't see a lot of it. And if the Russians were destroying a large amount of vehicles, that footage would get out because they love to tout that because that success is on their end, and we would eventually get some kind of like trickle down of that here in the West, and I'd be able to show it on stream, but we just don't see a lot of it. So I believe that maybe suggesting that the Russians just aren't destroying as many Ukrainian vehicles as the Ukrainians are destroying Russian vehicles. But I thank you very much for being a return supporter. It helps us out a lot, of course. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And I just want to quickly recognize two donations, one from Aaron Johnson and one from Gene Krause, both for $10 each. Thank you very much for your support of the channel, and it will surely go to the coffee fund. Thank you very much. Our next question up for the night is from Depleted Uranium Cowboy. He says, why do you think supposed Americans simp for Putin? It's peak cringe. Slava Ukraine.
Slava Ukraina, and I'm not entirely sure. That kind of falls into a lot of party politics in the way, and it's really confusing. So I'm not really sure why they do. It doesn't make any sense to me because I've seen all kinds of people kind of supporting it, and I just don't really understand it. Russia is clearly the aggressor in this war, and what they're doing is wrong in many ways, and I just don't really understand why anyone would back them up and support them, even if they have no stake in the matter in a way. But I thank you very much for the question, and unfortunately, I just don't understand where those people are coming from to even talk about it. So thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question up is from Anthony K. Smith. He says, Enforcer, I have a good idea for your channel after the war. You should follow stories of reconstruction around Ukraine and where best to use your weekly donations.
That's a very good idea. We may look into that. One thing I'm thinking about doing after this war is over, and we may start doing it during the war, actually, because this is pretty much, well, this is my job at this point, so I'm trying to look at ways of making sure that there's always interesting content for everyone to watch, is trying to cover stories domestically in the United States about political issues, and just showing them in an unbiased way, and giving everyone kind of like the picture of what both sides are about, and what they think, instead of trying to make pictures and draw them like most people do on the news these days. But I thank you very much for the support, and also the suggestion. I'll try and look into that in the future and see if we will do that, because we probably will. Ukraine is going to be a story that'll be around for a while, and a lot of people are really interested in what's going on in Ukraine, and I am as well, so I'm going to make sure to try and keep that content coming. So that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question up is from John Person. He puts in a donation of $10 and says, is it true that the Russian ship is circling because the captain dropped his keys? Just kidding, and thanks for your work.
I mean, like, it may be so. I mean, maybe they dropped an anchor and they're trying to pick it back up because, you know, the Russian Navy probably doesn't have a big budget, and losing an anchor or some keys is kind of a big deal to them because they're probably not going to be able to replace those for a while. So thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Suzanne Karpinski. She says, President Zelensky told NATO about the phosphorus bombs, killing civilians, including children. The USA said they couldn't confirm, but you told us that last night. Show them your pics. This is great.
Thank you very much for the support. And while we do have evidence of white phosphorus, and I'm very sure, because we've been getting a lot of that evidence over several days, I'm very sure that the US also has that evidence as well. It's just that they don't want to say that something like that's happening, because that will kind of fall under the red line that they kind of laid out today. And considering that that red line wasn't laid out at the time that happened, I'm kind of certain that they're not wanting to recognize that that happened beforehand, because then it'll make the West look kind of dumb in a way that they haven't responded now. So thank you very much for the support. Maybe I'll show them the pictures. I'm sure that they get inundated with a lot of stuff every day. I tried to reach out to the Ukrainian embassy and ask them some questions, but I believe they're a little bit too busy to respond. So I thank you very much for the support once again, and so we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next question up for the night is from CA Lags for $10. They say, if the Ukrainians stop their counterattacks at their old borders, do you think they'll try to retake Crimea? Thanks for the info.
I think they may, but Crimea is a little bit of a questionable one, though, because the Russians now consider it a state in the Russian Federation, and so attacking that would be, in Russia's mind, attacking sovereign Russian land, unlike trying to retake Donetsk and Luhansk, which they recognize as countries, but they don't recognize that as Russian land. So this would kind of be the same as pushing towards Belgorod or Kursk, in a way, at least in my opinion, and how I think the Russians would view it. So I hope that answers your question in a way. Really, honestly, what I think would happen at best, like the best situation for Ukraine, would be pushing them back to the border, to the original borders, in all fronts except for Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea, and then they would be in a very good situation to negotiate a peace, because the Russians now have no additional land that they have held in Ukraine beyond what they had originally going into the war. And so that's kind of my standpoint, but then again, that's entirely my opinion. The Ukrainians may have broader ambitions in mind if this war turns entirely in their favor and the Russians are on the back foot. So we'll just have to wait and see in a way. But I thank you once again for the support. It continues to help us run this channel, and it means a lot to me. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question of the night is from Scott Huston. He puts in a donation of $20 and says, I'll ask again, why do you not make a bumper sticker or window sticker with the Ukraine coat of arms? I made mine out of paper and taped it into my rear window. Why not make this support product?
Well, there's kind of a couple of reasons morally for me that I don't really want to make pro-Ukrainian stuff, is that it kind of feels like it'd be profiteering in a way. There's a lot of channels on YouTube right now that do make pro-Ukrainian merch, but the thing is that I mean, like, I'm totally fine, in my opinion, with making merchandise that's about the channel, and so it'd be about the enforcer name and stuff like that. But making merchandise about the war just doesn't really feel right to me, because it kind of feels like I'd be profiting off of the suffering that's occurring in this war. You know, that's different for the channel, because people just like how I present the content and stuff, and so supporting the channel is fine to me. But the war stuff and making merchandise to support the war and making profits off of it just doesn't seem right to me. So that's why I haven't made any supportive merch like that. And I probably wouldn't, just because I kind of have a moral conviction against that kind of thing. It feels wrong to me. But thank you very much for the support and the question. That's kind of my standpoint on it. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a question from AK Racer, putting in a donation of $20. He says, I've been watching since day 3. I love what you're doing, and with that being said, I've heard that sympathetic railway workers in Belarus have been sabotaging the railways to slow down the Russians. Do you have any evidence of this?
I do not have any evidence of that, sadly. Some bits of news like that may be falling under the radar, and I'm not really sure how they would be sabotaging it. Like, are they trying to set up traps on the rails where trains get derailed when they ride over them, or what? I don't really know. And I don't think, because you got to remember that railroad workers also work alongside engineers most of the time, and I don't think they'd be trying to sabotage the engineer's job and potentially get them wounded or killed in the process. But then again, I don't really know, and I haven't really heard about that, so unfortunately, I really can't comment on too much, and I'm going to have to kind of declare ignorance in that way, because I haven't heard about that. But nonetheless, I thank you very much for the support. It always helps at our channel, and it is a very interesting question nonetheless. I'm a big railroad fan myself, so I like to act like I'm privy on those kinds of things, but unfortunately, due to the actual situation inside of Ukraine, I haven't been hearing a lot about the news of how the railroads are operating outside of Ukraine, or inside of Ukraine for that matter, at this point. But I thank you very much nonetheless, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Knuckles once again. He puts in another $10 donation and says, Fox News says Biden said that a chemical attack would trigger a response in kind, but said the type of response would depend on the nature of the use. What does this mean to you? Same as you said.
What that would mean to me is that it would depend on if it was used on civilians. I believe that would probably be the idea. Like, if it was used as like an area denial kind of like method, where it was dropped in an area where there were no soldiers, and it was just meant to kind of like linger in the air and make sure that Ukrainian soldiers, or people for that matter, couldn't move through that area, and they didn't actively target a populated area and try and kill them, I believe that would be kind of a thing that would be allowed to slide. But if they dropped it somewhere in like Mariupol and just killed thousands of people with like a chlorine gas attack or something like that, I think that would be the kind of like cataclysmic point where the U.S. would say, okay, we're going into this thing, and that would cause us to enter the war. That's kind of my standpoint on it. Very good question, by the way. That was a very good one. I like that one a lot. That's something that could be dived into a lot in the chat, probably. But thank you very much once again, Knuckles. That's your third donation of the night, and I thank you so much for continuing to support this channel and what we do. And so I thank you very much, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a question from Ken Harford. He puts in a $10 donation and says, can Ukraine attain long-range cruise missiles to target Russian territory?
They already have. We know that they've been using Tochkas, and I believe they have a couple of other different kinds of cruise missiles that they've been using. But I know for sure that we've seen a Tochka get shot down, and we have seen damage from Ukrainian cruise missiles hitting things like the 1st Army Armory in Kursk. So we do know that they currently have some kind of cruise missiles. Not really sure about the amount of them nor the capabilities of them, but they do have them in some degree. I'm not really sure if the West will be trying to send them more of their own kind. I believe that they probably wouldn't, because it would require a decent amount of training to probably operate them, considering that they operate on a Western system instead of a kind of like post-Soviet system. But nonetheless, a very interesting question. I hope I answer that to the best of my abilities. I'm not an expert on everything. I know a decent bit about things, but I don't ever try and profess that I know a lot about certain things like how cruise missiles work and the inventory of the Ukrainian military and so on. But thank you nonetheless, and we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next question is from Scott Houston once again for a donation of $10. He says, "You misunderstood. Donated."
I don't. Do you know what he means by that?
Let's see. I think it was in reference to a comment he made just a moment ago. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Let's see, Scott. He said it was the question about bumper stickers and making a window sticker, and he wanted to know, let's see, if you would donate it.
Oh, I'm kind of scared to do that because you can get in a lot of trouble with the law if you do that kind of stuff wrong. Like if I say all the proceeds go to, like, a certain charitable cause, I have to account for every single one of those sales, the amount of money that I actually made in profit off of that bumper sticker, and I'd have to account each and every single one of them. So if I sold like 2,000 of them, I would have to like hand input 2,000 of these things and then show that all that went to donations, and that is a lot of work, and I'd have to most likely hire an accountant or something for that, considering I don't have enough time for it. So really on my end, kind of like logistically, it would be too difficult for me to do, and so that's why I don't really want to do that, because if I did do something like that, I would pretty much have to just take all the money and profit off of it, and I'd feel wrong doing that, considering that it's a thing that's supposed to support Ukraine. One thing I was thinking though, but this is also kind of difficult, is producing pro-Ukrainian stuff, but then making the price of it to where it only covers the cost of manufacturing and shipping, and so in the end I just break even. But I'm not really sure about that either. I'm trying to look into that right now, but I thank you very much for the question and the idea. It is an interesting one, but unfortunately due to logistical concerns on my end, I don't really think I'd be able to carry through on it. But thank you once again for the continued support, and so we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Joseph Coffey. He puts in a donation of $20 and says, "Does Russia have night vision goggles?" And I ask because when I served in '04, we ran night missions, and I don't see that here in this war. I love your channel, and I watch every night. That being said.
Thank you very much for the support and also recognizing our catchphrase in the way, but I don't think that the Russians have a large amount of them, and if they do, they're not really using a lot of them, because we've hardly ever seen evidence of the Russians actually having these on the front, so maybe they're not using them at all. We know that at the beginning of the war, it was being highly noted that they had a lack of night vision goggles, and so most of the fighting was occurring during the day, and bombardments would occur during the night, kind of like in a World War II style kind of warfare, or a World War I style kind of warfare. So that's really interesting to me, and it's also good to know that you are a former veteran. Thank you very much for your service, and I'm glad that you find the quality of the content coming out on this channel good enough that even with prior military experience, you're probably seeing that some of the things I do say sometimes are wrong, and I will admit they are, that you continue to watch the channel and find something worthwhile out of it. So I thank you very much once again, and I hope I answered that question in a way, and so we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question of the night is from Peter Stevens with an $18 donation. He says, "Japan is wanting their land islands back from World War II. They have been providing military equipment to Ukraine. And do you think them invading this territory might cause an issue? And your thoughts on a second front?"
I think that the Japanese would not try and attack the Kuril Islands, which are over here. They're claiming these because they actually used to own them prior to World War II, and then the Russians, the Soviets took them during the war, and the Russians inherited these islands after the collapse of the Soviet Union. I don't think they're actually going to try and push that. I believe they just claimed that to kind of like make their kind of like a support of the West known. Like, hey guys, like I hate Russia too, to the point I'm going to reclaim my lost lands. Something kind of like that. I don't really think they'll push that, and I don't really think a second front will come out of that, because while the Japanese, I believe, are the fourth largest economic power in the world, maybe third, I'm pretty sure they're actually third behind China and the United States. I'm not sure if they would actually push that. They certainly do have the economic ability to do it, but due to them just rearming over the past 2 years, I don't believe their army has gotten up to the strength. Their military as a whole have gotten up to the strength where they could actually be considered a heavyweight hitter in Asia at this point. So we'll have to see though, because I think it's unlikely. But then again, the world is kind of an unpredictable place in ways. So maybe it would happen. But I thank you very much for the support nonetheless. And so we're going to, and I hope I answered that in a good way. I got to make sure to end off each one with that, because I'm just giving my opinion. And there may be some things that weren't really covered there, or I wasn't really thinking about. So that's really just my opinion on the matter. But anyways, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a comment from John Kitson Music. He puts in a donation of $10 and says, "Do you have any new news on the anonymous hacker's progress?"
I don't have any news. I actually haven't heard a lot of news about Anonymous and what they've been doing since the first week of the war. And so maybe they're just taking a back burner compared to all the other news going on, or maybe they've stopped their attacks on Russia in a way. I'm not entirely sure. But as far as this channel's news has gone, we haven't gotten any additional news about them as of now. But I thank you very much for the support and the question. We're going to try and get, maybe we could just pull up some news right here for you. Let's see if we can find that. Russia anonymous. And let's see if we just get news from that. Anonymous claims it hacked Russia's central bank. So that's from Fortune. And then Nestle denies it was hacked by Anonymous. So apparently Anonymous claims that they hacked Nestle. But the most important thing that's happened today, apparently, according to what we can see, is that Anonymous hacked the central bank of Russia, which is interesting. I don't really know what that would entail. Maybe we could look at that overnight, or in the morning tomorrow, and try and add that into the news and talk about the cyber war that's kind of being conducted in the background of the ground war. But very interesting question, because we actually saw that apparently Anonymous has done something large again today. It's just that it's not making the kind of news that other things such as the port strike in Berdyansk did today. But I thank you very much for the question nonetheless. A very interesting one. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
And our next question up is from Rich Barrett. He puts in a donation of $20 and says, "Now that they have identified Putin's $700 million yacht in Italy, would it be considered a target of demolition by, let's say, a Ukrainian sympathizer?"
We actually did hear today, because I was passing by the news and I saw an interview of one of the former crew members of that yacht. He said that when he heard that Russia was invading Ukraine, because he was a Ukrainian, he actually tried to sink the yacht. I didn't really, I always pass the TV in passing, so I didn't sit around and listen to it. But I'm not really sure how he was trying to do that, but apparently he failed at it because the yacht's still floating. But maybe it would be, considering that it's just sitting there in a harbor somewhere in Italy. And what's really weird to me, and kind of suggests to me that I don't think the Russians expected the strong response to this invasion that they planned on, was that most of the oligarchs' yachts were harbored at places outside of Russia where Western countries could seize them. And so I'm thinking, based off of that, they weren't assuming that any of their personal assets would be at risk if they decided to invade Ukraine. And it turns out that if that's what they were thinking, they were apparently incredibly wrong. But I thank you very much for the question. It was a very interesting one, and as far as we know, that may be something that will happen in the future, because it appears, from what we can tell, someone already tried. So who knows? We'll just have to wait and see over the coming weeks if that is something that does happen. Thank you very much for the support. Once again, it helps us to continue to run this channel every single day, and it means a lot to me. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question up for the night is from Colin McEwen. He puts in a donation of $18. He says, "Attached is a full coho salmon. I heard that a Russian colonel was purposely run over by one of his own tanks, and soldiers are suffering from frostbite. Do you think that the Russian army will collapse at some point?"
I don't think the Russian army will collapse, but I think you will start to see a massive rout from Ukrainian territory in the future, maybe. But then again, that's kind of speaking from a bias, because the Russian military officers that are kind of higher up in command ensure that the military will follow orders. In World War II, we could see that things got very bad, and while the Russians did retreat, they didn't just fall apart and collapse at any point. So going off of that and kind of historical context, I don't think that's anything that would happen for the Russian army to just collapse and kind of like dissolve in the middle of Ukraine in the middle of the war. But, you know, it may happen. I don't really know. We haven't really seen anything like this since the Winter War with a world powers army, or a regional power as I think of them, doing this poorly. So maybe something like that would happen, considering that times have changed and this wasn't expected, and Russian morale, from what we can tell, is really low. So I hope I answered that question to the best of my abilities. That's just really my opinion on it, so take that with a grain of salt. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, I just want to quickly recognize a couple of donations real quick. We have a $6 donation from Bremner's Ghost. We have a $5 donation from Junebug47, a $5 donation from Dan Vassalo, and our next question up is from Infinite LP. They say, do you think Russia might use a tactical nuke if they don't gain ground anymore and their offensive comes to a complete halt?
I don't think they will, considering that now the United States has drawn a line, and I think Russia may be bluffing with with the use of nuclear weapons on the West. So I don't really think you do that now, considering that America says if they use a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine, they're going to get involved in the war. And Russia doesn't want that kind of heat, I'm assuming. So I don't think they'll be doing that anymore. That won't be on the table for them. And while they may threaten it, I don't think it's actually going to happen. You got to remember that North Korea has been threatening the world for decades with obliterating them with nuclear weapons. But then again, we've never seen them actually carry through on it. So Russia may be doing the same thing out of the same kind of playbook. But we'll just have to wait and see if that is something they do. We know they're kind of getting desperate at this point. Example, the hypersonic missile, although that's overhyped, they did use one. And so, thank you very much for the question. It's an interesting one, and I hope I answered it in a pretty good way. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a really good question from RDY4THDL. He asks, what is the off-ramp for Putin at this point? Is there a way for him to back down and save face?
I don't really think there is, and that's why this war keeps on going, because after seeing the very minimal amount of success they've been met with over the course of a month, you would think that at this point they'd actually be taking peace talk seriously and trying to get out of it, but as we can see, it appears that they're just continuing on as normal. So I believe that Putin thinks, and it kind of seems to be the case, that there really is no way out for him to save face, because he went into this war saying they're going to liberate the Ukrainians from, the certain so-and-so kind of people, and if he just backed out now, then he would be pretty much dropping the promise that he made to the Russians, and then they feel like he has betrayed them or done something poorly. But then again, he could sit there and say that the West has thwarted his plans and we have to get stronger or something like that. There's always a way that you could save face, but I'm not really sure if there's a way for him right now. So we'll just have to wait and see in the coming months. And I know I've been giving that answer a pretty good bit, but once again, we have to see if that holds to be true or not, and so we'll just have to wait for the coming weeks and months to see if there is a way that he'll be able to save face if he has to enter a peace agreement with Ukraine. So I thank you very much for the support. Hope I answered that question really well, and we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next question up is from D1FF. He says, watching this as a Ukrainian American that's in the army and stationed in Poland.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. Hopefully you didn't dox yourself there. But I thank you very much for the support nonetheless. And that's really interesting. You kind of come full circle. You're a Ukrainian American that is now in Poland. So you're almost back in Ukraine again. Hopefully you won't be back in there. And hopefully this doesn't escalate into a international war, because now we've kind of laid out the terms for us to get involved. And so, it's just kind of up to the Russians as to whether they'll step over that line or not. And I don't think they'll be apt to do that, but we'll just have to see if they are. So thank you very much for the support. Glad to know that you enjoy the show. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from BSG Wolf with a $10 donation. He says, do you think there would be a military coup d'etat if Putin tried to launch nukes in response to the USA or NATO entering the war?
I'm not entirely sure. I wouldn't really, because there's a lot of things involved with that. If the West is at war with them, these people may be thinking, well, even if I turn on this guy and I stop the nukes from being launched, what's to say that the West wouldn't just kind of like occupy Russia like they did Germany in World War II and have them all executed for their crimes still? That would be something they'd have to think about. And so if you put that into consideration and they have that kind of paranoia and fear in them, they may not actually try and launch a coup d'etat to stop Putin from launching nukes. They may actually side with them and think it's either that or we still get killed anyways by the West, you know, if they have that kind of paranoia in them. So I'm not entirely sure. That's my opinion and kind of looking at the situation historically as to how World War II went. Because, you know, of course, at the Nuremberg trials, most of the top leadership of Germany tried to claim that they were actually trying to stop everything and make it all better and sweet and stuff. But then they all ended up with a noose around their necks anyway. So, you know, the Russians may be thinking that way as well if something like that happened. But then again, that's just historical context. Take that with a grain of salt. It may be different this time around if things were to go that way. But I thank you very much for the support. And that was a really interesting question. I like that one. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question of the night is from Diffuse56. He says, is it true that Putin had one of his generals arrested for forgetting to rotate the tires on the wheelbarrow?
I'm not sure. We know that about 8 or 9 of them have been fired or removed from their positions. We know that about 4 or 5 of them have been killed in Ukraine, but I haven't really heard about the one being arrested for not rotating the tires. But if that is the case, and I just haven't heard about it, that's pretty funny. And that shows that there have been a lot of shortcomings in the Russian military that shows that things aren't going well if that's what's happened. But I thank you very much for the support and the question. And if that information is true, thank you for adding that into the stream. And so we're now going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and I quickly want to recognize a couple more donations without comments. We have a donation from Chris and Ted Sharp. We also have one from Michelle Summer and John Lee. And finally from Nick P. Thank you very much for your donations. We do appreciate your support for the channel. And the next question up is from Ned J10. He says, Enforcer, has there been any news about Voice of America or Radio Free Europe increasing broadcast directed toward Russian citizens?
I haven't actually heard about that. I know I said to one of our viewers who sent in a super chat last night that I tried to look into it, but I have very little time beyond what I do daily on this channel, and on top of that, now college has started back up again, so I'm kind of doing that. It's very hard to get to things like that because of just the amount of time I have. So I've been trying to look into that, but I haven't been able to get any information on it. So unfortunately, I'll have to claim ignorance on that, and I'm very sorry about that. I will try and get around to that eventually. And so that being said, I hope I answer that question in a way, and I'll try and circle back to that tomorrow if I can. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next question is from Vardman Jane. They say, thank you for the great work and the successful fundraisers.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I'm glad that you are very appreciative and proud of the fundraisers. I am as well. We've raised $30,500 for Doctors Without Borders and $29,800, I believe, for the American Red Cross. And so I'm very proud of how far those got, because I never expected them to do that well, yet both of them did way better than I thought they would. And so I thank everyone in the audience once again for helping me out with that, because that was incredible. That was wonderful. I've never thought that I would have that kind of power to be able to get a fundraiser that successful to carry on, and yet it did. And so I thank you all once again, and I'm very glad that you all support the channel and the cause in Ukraine. And so we're going to move on to the next question. And before we do, how many super chats do we have left?
It looks like we have about 10 left.
All right. I think we're going to do we won't do a cutoff yet. We're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next question is from Zach Jeffers. He says, Leaf Spring economy about to go nuts in Ukraine with all those destroyed equipment. And here is some text I can't understand, but I will put it in the chat.
All right. Well, I think the Leaf Spring economy will be taking off as well. Just for everyone who doesn't know, who's new to the stream, because I did see some comments before the stream started, and everyone was like, "What's this Leaf Spring thing about? Like, what's this joke?" A while ago, I watched a video of a pantsier that had been destroyed. I believe it was a pantsier, and they were walking around it, and I saw Leaf Spring suspension near the back of the vehicle. and I said that was archaic, and I didn't think that any vehicles in the modern day use leaf springs, and that looked antique. I proved myself wrong like a minute later by pulling it up on a Google search and finding out that a lot of modern vehicles have leaf springs on them. But the chat went off. Like, it didn't really go off. It just took off with it. And so everyone started joking about the leaf springs, and that's been something that's pretty much persisted ever since. And I bet you right now you're probably about to start seeing some leaf spring comments in the chat. But that's kind of like the story as to the whole leaf spring thing for everyone who didn't know. But yes, I think that economy will be taking off soon. And so I thank you very much for the support. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and the next question of the night is from Reener. He says, did you see President Biden almost tell the press about a secret meeting with the Ukraine president today?
I did not. So unfortunately, I really can't comment on that because I didn't see it myself. So I thank you very much for the support, and I'm sorry I'm going to have to declare ignorance on that in a way because I just didn't see it or hear it to be able to talk about it. But thank you for bringing that up, and if it is true, we'll try and circle back on that and maybe touch on it tomorrow if we can. Thank you once again for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question of the night is from Hoki Salou. They say, what are you studying in college?
When I'm majoring in history, actually, so a lot of my stuff, a lot of my evidence for how this war is being conducted and what may be happening is based off of history, because I study a lot on military history and domestic and kind of like civil history as well, because it's just incredible. History is an incredibly interesting thing to me, and it's very interesting to watch it unfold in a very similar way to what can be seen in the past and try and draw inferences in between what's happening now and what happened then, and maybe try and draw a conclusion from that. That's kind of what I'm doing on this channel in a way, although I haven't been able to do that recently, but that's what I'm studying. It's history. So I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next question is from the Majestic Turtle. Let's see here. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but the translation is, they shall not pass. Slava Ukraine. Great work, guys, and I love these live streams.
Thank you very much for the support. I know you've been a return donor, and I got to thank you so much for supporting this channel. It, of course, helps us do what we do, and without the support, we wouldn't really be able to do this because I wouldn't be able to do this as a job. And so I thank you so much for helping us out and helping me continue to do this. And it means a lot it probably means a lot more to me than it means to you, actually. But I thank you so much for it. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Mark Allen. He says, victory to the Ukrainian people, and Putin has failed big league.
I'd have to agree as well. I think he's failed big league, and I'm very happy that you support Ukraine as well. I do think that the Russians have poorly thought this out. They attacked at a bad time of year, and on top of that, everything else just seems poorly planned out as well. The logistics, the actual attacks, everything. It just seems like they didn't really put a lot of thought into this. So I have to agree with you on that statement, and I thank you once again for the support, very much so. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Knuckles again. He puts in a $5 donation and says, do you know if Ukraine still has 90% of their Air Force left?
I do not know that. I'm sure that they don't because they're asking for more aircraft. And we've seen on video, and some of these videos I didn't put up back in the past because, things were kind of a little tough back then, about a week or two ago. And so I didn't want to put those up because they looked terrible considering the context, but then again I should have just put them up, but we were still reaching 42 points a day, which was already stretching it in terms of news coverage. So it was kind of like a decision of what do I put up, and those would usually be taken down in light of trying to show actual frontline footage. But anyways, I don't think that 90% of it is still there. I'm thinking it may be more around 70 or 60%, but I don't really have any evidence or facts to support that kind of claim, but I don't think it's 90%, and I think that may be why Ukraine is still desperately pretty much begging for more aircraft from the West. But that's kind of my standpoint on it, and I thank you once again for the support, Knuckles. That's like the 4th time you supported the channel tonight, and I thank you very much for it. And so now we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and just a moment, Enforcer. I'm just making sure that our friendly cam bot has been removed from the chat. It's back once again, but It's been gotten rid of and dealt with. The next question of the is from Alex S., who says the price was 65 kopecks.
All right. Well, thank
Not
you.
sure what that was in reference to.
Me either. I'm not really sure. Maybe it's another sockeye salmon thing, but if it is, I thank you very much for the support. And I don't really know how to comment on that because I'm not really sure what it's referencing. But I thank you very much for the support once again. It means a lot to us, and so we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question of the night is from Hoki Saloom again. They say, any estimate on how much the Orsk ship costs, the one that Russia lost today?
I don't really have an estimate on that. We can once again pull up the Orsk ship, and let's see if we can get some information on the Wikipedia as to how much each ship in the class cost. I love how we can never just get that information. It'll tell you everything like the length of the beam, the propulsion systems, but it just won't tell you the cost of it. And I'm sure that the cost would kind of be a little off because it was built during Soviet times. And so there really isn't, I don't think there is a correct way to translate Russian costs to actual Western costs because their currency was so kind of like, well, it wasn't even like supported in the West. It was worthless outside of the Soviet Union. So I'm not really sure if we could get a cost on that, even if we could find one. But considering that it's an incredibly old ship, I'm sure it really didn't cost much, but it cost a lot in terms of kind of like morale value to the Russians, considering that they hyped it up just days before, only for it to be destroyed at port just days later. But I thank you very much for the support. Unfortunately, I couldn't get a number on that right then, and so I'm just going to have to say that I don't really know. We're kind of ignorant as to the cost of that ship. But anyways, thank you very much for the support, and so we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Dynamite Jones. He says, what do you think of all the high-ranked Russia officials going missing? Do you think this invasion could have been kneecapped before it began from the inside?
I think it may have been able to be kneecapped, but I think people were so scared of Putin that no one was really going to try and kneecap it deliberately in a way and kind of like kill it before it could start. But I do believe that once these people saw that it actually began and that things were going bad, they tried to escape as fast as possible, because we saw that most of the oligarchs had hopped on planes out of Russia within days of the war starting, which tells us that they knew that it was going to go badly and they just jumped ship while they could. So that's kind of my opinion on it. Don't really have a lot of information about that either way, because the oligarch stuff I've just never really focused on much. It's more like frontline news that I do. But I thank you once again for the question. It was a pretty good one, and we'll try and look into that and maybe get some more information on it in the coming days. So I thank you very much, and we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next question is from Decula3, who says, have a bunch of sugar in your coffee.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the support once again. We do love coffee here. I love coffee a lot. It's something I have learned to appreciate a great way, because before I did these streams, I never drank coffee, and now I drink coffee before every single stream. I also like pike roast, just for everyone to know. That's also for the Russian hitmen that are coming my way. Make sure to poison the pike roast out of everything. But thank you once again for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And I just want to recognize two donations real quick. We have a $5 donation from Jonathan Toe, and we have a $5 donation from BSG Wolf, who says, with that being said. So thank you both for your donations. We appreciate the support once again. And we are moving on to the next question, which is from Jump in the Line. They say, do we have any idea how Ukraine can use the crypto they're being sent? Can they use it for drones or munitions, or would there be any issues? Slava Ukraine.
I'm not really sure how crypto works. I hate to say that because that's something that everyone's getting into. You know, you always hear the jokes, bro, have you ever tried crypto? Have you ever invested? You know, I mean, I don't know anything about crypto. So I don't really know how it works or how they're going to be able to spend it when they get it. So I really can't talk in any way about it because I just don't really know enough about crypto to be able to talk about it. That's kind of the same with stocks as well, because everyone has that phase in their life where they kind of go through like the get rich quick kind of things, like stocks and big like crypto now. That's kind of like the thing, but I've never really gotten into that because I've never seen anyone succeed at it, really, so I never tried to get into it myself. But I thank you very much for the question. Unfortunately, I can't answer it just due to a lack of knowledge on how crypto works or what countries do to accept cryptocurrency as a payment, you know, for like drones and such. So unfortunately, I can't really answer that question, but I thank you very much for the support nonetheless, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Dan Stiles. He says, I am a history teacher. This has been a big topic, and many of my students are worried about nuclear war. What would you say to calm them?
I would say that nuclear war, considering that the United States has drawn a line, and usually when that happens, it increases the tension, but usually lessens the likelihood of such a thing occurring. I think that we're looking at a Cuban Missile Crisis in a way, not in terms of the actual events surrounding this, but in terms of the standoff that's kind of occurring at the moment. Because the Russians can move nukes or use them in a certain area, much like them moving nukes into Cuba and supposedly going to use them in the future on the United States, the U.S. will respond. So that's kind of like the situation we're in right now, and kind of like the Cuban Missile Crisis, this may end after a tense standoff for some time. That's kind of what I'm looking at it as, but then again, that's entirely my opinion. But hopefully that soothes them over just a little bit, and hopefully gave you a little bit of ideas on how I'm looking at it, since you are a history-minded person as well. So I thank you very much for the support and the question. Hopefully that does ease someone's mind somewhere. And so, with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and the next question up is from Mr. Rondalco. He says, why doesn't Ukraine hire a private military like the U.S. did in Baghdad? Blackwater merged with Academy now is Constellus. They have 100,000 plus trained men.
I don't really know why they haven't done that yet. Maybe because I'm not really sure, honestly, because cost isn't really a factor in war, considering that countries can take on debt. Ukraine could just take on debt and hire a private military company, but there may be some political reasons as to why they can't. But I'm not entirely sure, so I really can't say why they haven't, because that was something that was used very much, very heavily in Iraq. But then again, we do have to remember that while PMCs did make up a decent amount of the forces, they usually were some kind of security forces in the rearward part of the lines. And I don't really think that Ukraine is focusing on that kind of, those kind of units right now, because the order behind the lines is generally assured at the moment. I think the Russians would try and focus on something like that, though, considering that they are invading a country and that they're going to have to try and control the populace at some point, like right now, considering that we see so many protests occurring in the southern areas of the country. But I thank you very much for the question. It's a very interesting one, and I hope I've answered that in a pretty good way and didn't misrepresent anything there, because I don't know a lot about PMCs as well. I know I'm saying that a lot tonight. I just generally know a lot about logistics and overall strategies in the war. And beyond that, I know like surface level stuff about the rest of it, but not really enough to act like a total expert on it and just be a know-all in a way. So I hope I answered that in a fairly competent way. And thank you once again for the support. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
And we have another question from Mr. Rondalco again. He says, since Russia is taking hostages, what's to stop someone from getting Alina Kabeva and Putin's 4 kids in Switzerland and using them as ransom?
That's a good question. So he's pretty much. Let me make sure to check this with you. He's pretty much asking, why doesn't the West kidnap Putin's family and take him for ransom?
Yeah, he wants to take Alina and Putin's 4 kids hostage and use them as ransom in Switzerland.
I don't really think the West operates like a group of thugs in a way they would capture someone's family and hold them hostage in a way. I don't really think that would go over well with anyone here in the West, and so that's probably the reason why no one's done that. And on top of that, they're inside of Switzerland, and while Switzerland has taken some actions in this war, Switzerland maintains their neutrality to a T, and so they wouldn't do anything, and they wouldn't allow any foreign countries to come into Switzerland and do that there. So that being said, I hope I answered that question fairly well. I know a decent amount about Switzerland. You can ask Matthew, because he's heard me talk and talk and talk about how Switzerland works. It's a very interesting country, and I suggest that anyone who doesn't know about it read up on it a little bit. But thank you for the question. It's an interesting one, but I don't think that'd be practical, and I don't think a lot of people in the West would really like that decision or choice if Western governments decided to go through with something like that. So thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and the next question is from Fuzz the Cat, who says, appropriate response if Russia uses chemical weapons, option number 1 being blockade all Russia shipping, or option number 2, EMP, Moscow killing all the electronics?
Those are two interesting options. I'm not. I think the only option that the West would go with if Russia was to do something like that was just an all-out conventional war, and they probably just start rolling through Belarus, or they would go to the Baltic states. They just start rolling through Russia from the Baltic states, and then just start moving troops into Ukraine and start pushing from there, and then just wait for Belarus to get involved and then floor them as well. I think that would be the most likely route of action by the West if it even got that far. Once again, if the U.S. said they were getting involved, it may just immediately go into a nuclear onslaught. But who really knows? We just have to see what would happen if something like that was to unfold. So I thank you very much once again for the support. Those are two interesting inputs on what could happen, and we'll just have to see if that is the case. And so I thank you very much once again, and we're moving on to the next question.
Okay, and our next question is from Heidi Lynn Wolf, putting in a donation of $20. They say, please explain how the UK gave up nukes cause we said we'd protect them. What the hell?
I think what you meant by that was Ukraine, because the UK still has nukes. Ukraine gave up the nukes because the United States, Britain, and Russia said, "Hey, man, you're not like part of the cool kids club of all the countries in the world that are allowed to have nukes." And, we're kind of scared considering that you're kind of an unstable country right now, that you're just going to have these nukes fall into the wrong people's hands, or they'll be sold off to someone, and then we'll have to try and figure out something to do with that. So could you just, give them up and, that'll be cool and all? And so they said, yeah. I mean, that's kind of like the gist of what happened. And so they gave up the nukes kind of because they knew they really couldn't look after all of them. Like, they inherited like a 1,000 or a couple of thousand of them. So it was a very large number, and that's very expensive to maintain. And so they just decided to hand them back over to Russia to be disarmed, I believe. And then that was just the end of that. And so at the time, it was a pretty solid deal because Russia was under control of Boris Yeltsin, and Russia was just generally letting the West do whatever they wanted. But, later on things changed, and now I bet Ukraine is starting to look back at that decision and say that was a bad idea, and that was a really poor one. But I thank you very much for the support, and I'm glad that you did ask that question because it's one that's rarely asked, but it's a good question. And so I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question comes in from Trademarks and Patents for Growing Businesses with a donation of $10. He's neighbor from Chernihiv tells me that there's been a major pushback that started on Tuesday. City has been quiet for days. Audible distant shelling, and the operative word being distant.
Interesting. So is he? Are you taking that as well? Is he saying that the Ukrainians pushed back the Russians, or the Russians have pushed back the Ukrainians?
I believe the Ukrainians have pushed back the Russians.
Well, so I will be a little bit optimistic with that statement and alter this front line here just by a little to represent that apparently the city isn't under a direct threat of being in the middle of a front line. So we'll push it back a little bit further so that way Chernihiv is out of the woods in a way. But thank you very much for that information. That's very interesting, and I hope that your friend stays safe because war is a dangerous thing, and we know that the Russians have no regard for civilians. So make sure that he stays safe and that if he needs to, he can get out of there, hopefully. And so thank you once again for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next question is from Jumpin' the Line once again. He says, the coffee fund is definitely up to the point where you can get yourself a nice espresso machine when that sweet YouTube money starts rolling in.
If it ever does. I mean, a lot of everyone is giving me support, and I'm so appreciative of it, but YouTube's system pretty much makes it to where I'm not going to see any of this for a month and a half. And so from now till then, this channel is still running off of what I have saved up in my bank account if I'm ever having to actually do anything with it. So thank you very much for the support once again. Maybe I'll look into that when I actually see all the support come rolling in that YouTube will finally allow me to get. And so I thank you once again for the support. And how many super chats do we have left, Matthew?
Let's see. It looks like we have 6 left.
All right. So I see that some super chats keep on rolling in, and we're going to put a cutoff on those because it's going to start getting really late into the night if we allow them to keep on coming in. So if you would like to support the channel, make sure to come back tomorrow if you have a question and give a super chat then. But for tonight, if you just want to support the channel and you don't really care if a question's answered or not, just leave a super chat without anything in it or a super sticker. So that way you're not getting anything left out. You know, it'll just be support. Or if you have a question, make sure to come back tomorrow and first thing on the stream, leave a super chat, and it'll be one of the first questions answered. So I thank you all once again for your support, and we're going to answer these last super chats, and then we're going to move on to the remaining questions in the chat, about 3 of them, and then we'll call it a night.
Okay, and the next one is from Anthony K. Smith again. He says, "Yep, I'm up for it. Enforcer coffee mugs and t-shirts saying, and with that being said, 100%.
Well, thank you very much, and it's really interesting to me that a lot of people would like merch for the channel. That's something that I kind of been batting around a bit, but considering that a lot of people would like it, I feel like that would be pretty neat for y'all to actually get something out of supporting the channel instead of just sending super chats in the way. Although I'm not scoffing at super chats, I'm very happy that people support me either way. But it would be neat to get a little bit of like a branding around the channel so that way people can show their support physically for it. So I thank you all once again for the support, and I thank you for the idea. We'll probably look into the coffee mugs thing, considering that so many people have brought it up, as well as the t-shirts and maybe some other little neat knickknacks. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from none other than Mark Bohachuk. He says, "Seen some good questions in regular chat. Is Belarus open season if Ukraine wanted to send in sabotage units or probing attacks?"
I'm not entirely sure. We know that the border police in Belarus, I think, are about the same size or larger than the army. I'm not entirely sure about that. That may be completely false. I'm not really sure about that once again, but it may be. I don't really know. I mean, I think that they're kind of keeping an eye though on border crossings from Ukraine to Belarus, considering that they're kind of in a tense standoff and they have kind of interest to make sure that no Ukrainians enter Belarus right now. But you never know. I mean, like, maybe Ukrainians could get over there and start sabotaging things. We just have to see in the coming days if that would be the case. So I hope I answered that question really well. Thank you much for the super chat once again. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Anthony K. Smith once again. He says, "Enforcer, the info I have found is it is sympathetic Belarusians, partisans, and they have been destroying all rail junctions and tracks."
Oh wow. Well, if that's true, and I assume that it is, considering that I trust most of my viewers. Well, actually, all my viewers. Actually, there's not a single one that I don't trust. That's really interesting to know. I wonder how much damage they've actually caused to the Belarusian railway network, and considering however much it is, I wonder how much damage that's causing to the Belarusian economy as a whole. So I thank you very much for the info, and that's something interesting to think about. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And I just want to recognize a couple of donations real quick. We have a $2 donation from Lillis Embers, who says, "Greetings from Leaf Springs, Alabama." We also have a $3 donation from Takata Store, a longtime channel supporter. He says, "Y'all carry on the great streams." And thank you very much to both of you for the channel support. We do very much appreciate it. So the next question we have is from, let's see, Maxi Mad. He says, "By the way, that video is from 2017, the confrontation video."
I was thinking so. I know which one you're talking about is that location unknown video, and it didn't look like it was something that happened recently, and so I started to discredit that, and I'm glad that you could back me up on that, because I don't know who was trying to push that as relevant modern information, but that's obviously not from the present day in the current war. So I thank you very much for backing me up on that, and so we're going to move on to the next question.
And finally, to wrap up the super chats, I just want to recognize 3 last donations here. We have a $5 donation from Reener, a $5 donation from BSG Wolf, and a $5 donation from Jonathan Toe. Once again, thank you very much for the donations and the support. And unfortunately, if you have left a super chat beyond this, we will not be able to get to it tonight because we do need to make time for our other questions as well. So I'm ready when you are, Enforcer, to ask a couple of regular questions.
All right, hit me with them.
All right, so first up, let me get up here and make sure that we're looking at the right ones. Solar Wizzo asks, "Enforcer, what kind of cruise missiles might have attacked the ship in the harbor?"
I'm not entirely sure. Let's try and pull up the cruise missile inventory. Cruise missiles of Ukraine. And let's see if we can just get like an idea of the kind of cruise missiles that they have. So they have a Neptune cruise missile, which is apparently an anti-ship cruise missile. Maybe they use this one. Maybe so. Missile was revealed for the first time, which was held in Kiev. First tests were conducted in 2016. The missile would be provided to the military in 2019. In March 2021, the Ukrainian Navy obtained the first units of the Neptune. So, it may have been one of these, although we don't have a lot of information about what it actually was. This is an anti-ship missile, which would fit the role of what it did, but they may have used something else. Let me see. Cruise missile, Ukraine missile systems. Let's take a look at that. That's going to be too hard to find. I'm going to assume it may have been a Neptune. While those are brand new and it's probably in limited numbers, I believe that since it is an anti-ship missile, that's probably what they would have tried to use. So I thank you very much for the question. I hope I answered that one pretty well, and hopefully the information comes out to support that claim. And if it doesn't, you know, we all make mistakes and we'll learn from that one. And so I thank you very much for the question, and we're going to move on to the next one.
And the next one is from Clifford Plass. He says, Enforcer, do you think that Russia is deliberately baiting NATO into a full-scale war?
I don't think they are, because the full-scale war would be much worse for them than it would be for us, even with the mutually assured destruction in mind, because if you ever look at the actual simulations of what a nuclear attack would look like from Russia going to the West and from the West going to Russia, the Russians would fare far much worse in a mutually assured destruction scenario than the West would. So I don't really think they're trying to goad us into it. I think that they're trying to flex their muscles that they really don't have, and they're hoping that the West doesn't respond in full force in a way, because that's usually how the Russians have been operating since they became a thing in 1991. So I thank you very much for the question. I hope I answered that really well. That's kind of my opinion on it, though, and then of course is subject to change in a way, or it may be wrong, so take it with a grain of salt. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the last question of the night.
Okay, and the last question of the night is from Jose M. He says, Enforcer, have you heard about the Russian tank commander that sold his tank for $10,000 to the Ukrainians on the side of the road? Is that true?
I have not heard about that. That is like the weirdest thing I've heard yet. Not bashing you for it, it's just that if that actually did happen, or if that was a story that's just being pushed, that's like the weirdest one I've heard. So I'm not entirely sure if that is true or not. I just really can't say, because if it is, I wouldn't doubt it, but at the same time, it is kind of a little far-fetched sounding in a way, and I haven't heard about it to confirm that either way, so I don't really know. But we have heard a lot of stories about the colonel getting run over by a tank, so I think that one may be true, but we'll have to see if there's any evidence to back that one up. But once again, I thank you all very much for coming to the stream. That will be the end of the questions for tonight and the end of the news. If y'all have enjoyed it and y'all are new viewers who've just come to the channel, make sure to like the video and subscribe. It does help us out a lot when people subscribe and like. It helps us out a lot in the analytics. If you really did enjoy this stream, I'm sorry if I'm kind of losing. I'm exhausted right now, but if you did enjoy the stream and you want to help out Ukraine, wait around until Sunday to help out. We run a fundraiser every single Sunday to help out a organization in Ukraine and help out their cause. We also, I'm sorry y'all, I'm so tired, but we also have a link in the description below to a whole load of fundraisers that also are operating in Ukraine and helping them out in a way. And so I thank y'all all so much once again for coming to the stream and watching the news tonight and helping support this channel and helping me continue what I do. And so thank you all once again, and I'll see y'all all tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Hope y'all have a great night and take care.